What if Bella Swan had a different past, one filled with secrets, strength, and a family legacy that changes everything? Welcome to Grimoire Audiobooks. Today, we dive into Bella Hale, an enthralling Twilight fanfiction by the talented JulesSC. This story reimagines Bella's journey, weaving a tale of family, resilience, and love, with twists that will leave you spellbound. Disclaimer: this audiobook is a transformative fan-created work inspired by Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. All original characters, settings, and trademarks are the property of their respective owners. This reading is purely for entertainment, with no copyright infringement intended. Bella Hale takes a fascinating spin on the Twilight saga, where Bella Swan is no ordinary girl but a Hale, deeply connected to the enigmatic Cullen family. From the thrilling dynamics of family bonds to a fresh perspective on well-loved characters, this story offers an entirely new take on the Twilight universe. With the resurgence of interest in the Twilight series and rumors of potential reboots, it's clear that fans' love for this universe remains undying. Stories like Bella Hale remind us why these characters continue to captivate us. JulesSC is celebrated for their ability to create vivid reimaginings of beloved characters and worlds. With a knack for emotional depth and intricate storytelling, they've become a favorite among fanfiction enthusiasts. So, sit back, relax, and prepare to experience a thrilling reimagining with Bella Hale by JulesSC here at Grimoire Audiobooks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Once we reach 10 likes and 10 comments, the next part of this captivating story will be unlocked. Chapter 1. Bella's POV. I don't know what happened. First, my mom and dad were happy, and we were going to the annual carnival. Then, everything went blank. It was so scary, and I wanted my mom. She always knew what to say when I'm scared, but I couldn't find her. My head was in pain. It was throbbing so badly. I started to cry. "Sure, it's all right, you're safe," someone said. Who was that? I've never had that voice before. It sounded like velvet. Instantly, I calmed. I tried to open my eyes and saw a pair of golden eyes, looking at me with concern and alarm. "Mommy?" I whispered. I don't think my voice was loud enough. My throat was too sore. I swallowed painfully and opened my mouth to try again. Before I could, though, the same voice said, "She's not here right now." "It's all right. I'll be right here. You're safe." I nodded my head, then stopped because it hurt too much. I studied him now. He was older than me. He had the strangest hair, brown and red mixed together. Copper, I realized. His skin was white, and his features were sharp. His eyes were golden. "Golden," I whispered, and he froze. I didn't know why. I liked golden. "Carlisle," this angel said. "She's awake." I felt something cold touch my forehead and tore my gaze away from the angel. "Hello, Bella," someone Carlisle said, smiling at me. I couldn't help but smile back. He had the same eyes as the angel. He looked the same somehow, though he was blonde and older looking than the angel. "Are you an angel, too?" I asked him curiously. Carlisle broke into laughter. "No, not quite. I'm a doctor. Isabella Dash." I shook my head. "Bella," I corrected him firmly. "Bella," he repeated with a smile. "I'm going to make sure you feel better, all right?" I nodded my head. I turned back to look at my angel. He looked so sad. "Why?" I reached out to touch his nose and giggled when it was as cold as Carlisle's hand. My angel looked shocked. Then I remembered my mommy and daddy. "Where's my mommy and my daddy?" I asked him. My angel wouldn't look at me anymore. Is he mad at me? I continued to gaze at him, my bottom lip quivering, my eyes filling up with tears. When he saw this, he panicked. With gentle hands, he wiped away the tears that had fallen down my cheeks. "Sure, Bella, don't cry," he whispered urgently. "Are you in pain?" I shook my head, but a sob broke free. "You're mad at me?" I said, cringing into the pillow propped up behind me. He looked shocked again. Why would you say that? He asked, confused. You won't look at me. Daddy does that when he's mad at me, I explained. My angel smiled sadly and shook his head. It's not that, Bella, he whispered, leaning in closer to rest his chin on my pillow. Will you promise me you won't be angry if I tell you? I nodded my head, eager to know. Do you know what heaven is? I scrunched up my nose in concentration. I got it. A few months ago, Grandma went to heaven. Mommy was crying and I thought she was upset, and she said she was, but she was happy too, because Grandma's in heaven and she's happy there. My grandma went to heaven, I told him proudly. Mommy was very sad because she couldn't see Grandma anymore, but she told me not to cry. She said Grandma was happy in heaven because she would get everything she wants there. So we should be happy, too. My angel nodded slightly. Bella? He shot a helpless look at Carlisle, who sat tentatively on the edge of my bed. Your mom and your dad, they went to heaven, too, he told me quietly. I considered this. So they were happy, but that would mean that I wouldn't get to see them anymore. Just like I couldn't see Grandma. But they didn't even tell me goodbye. I protested, tears falling down my cheeks. And I'm little. My angel enveloped me in a hug, and I fell into him, sobbing. I wanted my parents. I didn't want them to go to heaven. If they stayed with me, they would be happy too. Sure, it's all right, Bella. I'll protect you. I continued to cry into his shoulder. I knew I should be happy that my parents were in heaven. They were happy now and would get everything they want. They were probably with Grandma. I was just sad that I was never going to see them again, or get to tell them goodbye, or anything. I missed them. Edward, Carlisle said quietly, as soon as I was done sobbing. Edward? Was someone else in the room? Yes, you should check with child services. That's a good idea, my angel replied. I realized that Edward was probably his name. Child services? I frowned. What was that? I didn't notice when Carlisle left. I was too comfortable in Edward's arms. Then it occurred to me, I'm little. Both my parents went away to heaven already. Where am I going to live? Edward? I called out tentatively, pulling back to look into his golden eyes again. His eyes were the same shade, the same color as Carlisle's, but the depth was different. His was more intense, more beautiful. I felt very safe with him. He raised an eyebrow at me. He looked so serious that I started to giggle. He looked at me amused. What's so funny, Bella? I shook my head and buried my head against his shoulder, the giggle growing stronger. Well, I like her already. I heard a booming voice. I jumped, startled, and looked around in panic. Oh, Emmett, you scared her, came a gentle chiding. My stomach clenched. That voice reminded me of my mother. I looked for its source and found a beautiful woman, her brown hair cascading down her back, her amber eyes glowing as she came closer to me. I settled back in my bed, watching as she entered the room. For others followed her. I scrutinized them. There was a large man with heavy muscles and dark hair. His face was happy, though, like a little child. He reminded me of Pluto in those Popeye cartoons my dad loved to watch. Next to him was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I smiled at her shyly and received a tentative smile back. She was blonde and tall and looked like the women on my mom's magazines. A tall, blonde man stood next to her, his arm wrapped around another girl. He was looking at me apprehensively, but I thought I caught the hint of a smile playing around his lips. Then there was a smaller, shorter girl with spiky hair. She was bouncing on her feet, and her excitement was so obvious I started to giggle again. She smiled widely at me and leaned over the bed to kiss me on the cheek. I blushed and squirmed, but waved slightly at them all. She's adorable, the spiky-haired girl burst out, dancing over to Edward. "Alice," he warned. She pouted, and I grinned. She looked like I did whenever my mom told me I couldn't have ice cream before dinner. I wondered what they were all here for and why they looked so excited. "Child services won't be able to send someone until Monday," Carlisle announced, stepping into the room. He smiled at the sight of everyone. "I see you've met Bella." "Is that her name?" the big man asked. His laughter was infectious. "I like it." Now, Emmett," said the woman who reminded me of my mother. Carlisle turned to Edward, eyebrows raised. "Does she know who everyone is?" he asked. Edward shook his head, realizing this, and started to explain. "This is Carlisle and Esme." He gestured to the motherly figure. "They're my parents." I waved at them shyly. If it was possible, Esme's smile widened even further. "These are my sister and brother, Alice and Emmett, and these are Rosalie and Jasper," he told me, pointing to the spiky-haired girl, Pluto, the blonde girl, and the blonde guy. "We're all a family," Carlisle added. I nodded my head, then my gaze dropped. I still didn't know what'll happen to me. I hadn't gotten the chance to ask Edward yet. "What's wrong, Bella?" Jasper asked, and I looked up startled. My eyes had already filled with tears, so I couldn't see them clearly. I blinked a few times to clear my vision, but the tears fell to my cheeks instead. "Where am I gonna go?" I whispered, grabbing the thin sheet on the bed and holding it tighter around me. "Oh," Alice said, and her eyes closed. When she opened them again, I think I detected sadness and a little bit of happiness. "No, Alice," Edward growled. I blinked at him. Alice hadn't said anything. "Please?" Alice whined. She would like it with us. I felt myself blush and my eyes lighting up at this. "You want me to stay with you?" I asked Alice. She nodded her head excitedly and climbed on the bed. I giggled at her enthusiasm, but fell into her gentle hug nonetheless. "We could be like sisters," Alice said, ignoring Edward's angry glares. "Oh, I can't wait to start preparing your room. Let's see, does blue suit you?" "Yes, I think it does." I don't even think I was present in her one-sided conversation, so I turned towards Edward, who was scowling at Alice. My heart dropped when I realized what he was so upset about. "You don't want me to stay with you?" I accused him, my bottom lip trembling. Edward blinked and stopped scowling. He looked a little panicked that I might start crying again, and that just made me sadder. I felt the first tears started to escape from behind my eyelids. Edward uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. "That's not it, Bella," he whispered urgently, shaking his head. But I turned away from him. He looked so sad. He really didn't want me there. "See what you did, Edward?" Rosalie snapped. I started to sob. This was all very embarrassing. I didn't want to be the little girl who started to cry about everything, but I couldn't help it. Before I knew it, I was out of my bed. I blinked in shock to see Esme cradling me in her arms, shushing me soothingly, and glaring at Edward at the same time. He hung his head, and I felt bad for him. I was being silly, and his family was blaming him for it. "Sorry," I whispered. It was too soft for him to hear Esme, and I weren't even anywhere near him. But he raised his head and gave me a little crooked smile anyway. I felt myself grin back, my tears disappearing. Esme's hand was rubbing my back soothingly. "Well, she really has nowhere else to go. I think it would be a good idea if she came to live with us until Monday," she said softly. I wrapped my arms around Esme's neck and rested my head on her shoulder, my eyelids drooping. "What about Dash?" I didn't hear the rest. I was already in deep slumber, dreaming of my last hours with my parents. Edward's POV. I was going to kill Alice. How could she even suggest this in the first place? I knew what she saw in her vision, Bella being in our house, playing on the floor with Emmett happily, while the rest of us watched. Yes, it looked like a good time, but seriously?
We were a family of vampires.
She was a child. A human child. One temptation too many. One of us could kill her. Carlisle, and I shouldn't even have been there. We'd ventured into the woods for hunting, and we'd had a satisfying meal. I was just taking a rest when I heard the screeching. Carlisle and I had run off towards the road not far from the woods and saw the wreckage. It was so bad that I didn't think anyone could survive. Bella survived, and she was a true miracle. I admit, she has a certain draw to her. Her blood, it smelled refreshing like freesia. It wasn't strong, since she was so small, still a child. But what would happen if she got hurt and cut herself or something? Not only Jasper, but any one of us could lose control.
We couldn't take that risk.
Of course, Carlisle would be able to refrain himself, but he was one vampire against 6 if it ever happened. Calm down, Edward. It's only for a few days, Rosalie had thought, exasperated with my moody behavior. She was still unforgiving towards me for making Bella cry in her hospital room. The truth was she was excited. Bella was a little girl, so human, so soft, so warm. She was the daughter Esme and Rosalie never had, the sister Jasper and Emmett always wanted. Carlisle was intrigued and taken by her. I had to admit she had charmé button nose, brown hair, big brown eyes. She was perfect. The only flaw I could think of was flabbergasting. I couldn't read her mind. She was blank. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't read a single one of her thoughts. When I voiced this worry to Carlisle when Bella was asleep, he'd given me a few theories. One being she had been through a traumatic incident. But I had been around people who had gone through terrible things. Their minds were unfocused, but I could still hear every fleeting thought. Carlisle suggested that it was because she was a child, but I could read the minds of infants, never mind 6-year-old girls. They might not make much sense, but it was still there. She was perfectly human, though, and nothing seemed to be wrong with her mind or body, nor with my talent when unleashed on others. Carlisle told me not to worry about it excessively. We'll figure it out in time, he told me jovially. That meant he planned on having Bella around for some time. But we couldn't. We could harm her. And I'd seen the vision in Alice's head before she blocked me with an Avril Lavigne song. I rolled my eyes at that. Of all the music she could have chosen. The point was, Bella had been older during that vision. She was probably 9 or 10. Her hair was longer, her legs were longer. Subtle differences, but I could tell. That meant that she would be in our lives for longer than just this weekend. I sighed. Alice had picked one lousy song after another to recite in her head. I wondered what she wasn't telling me. Carlisle and Esme were just finishing up on the paperwork to take Bella home with us until Monday. We were all waiting in Carlisle's office. Bella was in Rosalie's lap, playing with her. Blonde hair and poking at Rosalie's arms and face, as much as she could reach. Rosalie didn't mind, in fact. Every thought she had was of how adorable and beautiful this precious human child was. I rolled my eyes again, but kept my tongue. Not having a child of her own, because of what she was had taken its toll on Rosalie. This was a once-in-a-lifetime thing for her. Of course, it was only going to get worse when we would have to give Bella to social services. I don't care what the vision said. I wasn't going to allow Bella to be harmed in any way. Your protective nature's already kicking in, Jasper said suddenly, startling me. Almost everyone looked at me then. Only Bella continued playing with Rosalie's hair idly. She was still grumpy after being woken by her hunger after a few minutes of sleeping in Esme's arms. She had yet to receive her food since Esme wasn't back. What? I asked warily. You're already wanting to protect her, Edward, Jasper told me, smirking. You won't be able to let her go that easily. I shook my head, defiant. I still know that we can't, I whispered the last part. We are what we are. Am I the only one who remembers that? No, you're not, Rosalie snapped, causing Bella to jump. I shut my mouth quickly, silently berating myself for upsetting Rosalie. Carlisle cleared his throat behind us, and I turned, guiltily. We're all set to go home, he said gently, smiling at Bella. She waved at him tiredly. I have food, Bella, Esme announced, stepping into the room. She brightened up and struggling to a sitting position. Rosalie helped her. I watched as Esme handed her a tiny bag of fries. Bella's small hand dug into the bag eagerly and pulled out a few fries. She munched on them happily. I smiled a little at the sight of that. She was very easily pleased. I suppose that's because she was just a child. The others were watching her eat as well, and she blushed when she realized this. Aren't you going to eat? She asked, looking around confusedly. That brought me back to reality, and I frowned, grimacing. Jasper cleared his throat and shook his head, smiling.
No, he said.
I heard a little of his southern accent coming out. We've already eaten. You go ahead, Bella, it's okay, he urged her reassuringly. Bella took his word and begun to eat again. I just stared at her, this girl, whose mind I can't penetrate, whose existence drew me forward, whose smile charmed my entire family into wanting to adopt her. I sighed again. This was going to be interesting. 2. Thursday night surprise. Edward's POV. We went out of the hospital with Bella still munching on her food. I don't see how they're so appealing, it smelled disgusting to me. Carlisle and Esme wanted to bring Bella home as fast as possible. We had 3.5 days with her, and absolutely nothing for her at all. We had to prepare. Esme went to get groceries, food, and necessities. Alice and Jasper went to get things Bella would need, diapers, change of clothes, the whole shebang. As Alice had so gracefully put it for me before she dashed out of the hospital in her Porsche without a second glance back. That left Carlisle, Rosalie, and Emmett with Bella and I. It could be worse. When Rosalie had stood up from her chair to carry Bella out of the hospital, Bella had protested, flailing her arms out at me and pouting. For the love of all things holy, I had fallen for it. I gently lifted her from Rosalie's arms and cradled her against my cold chest. Bella had given me a wide smile, blinked up at me, and touched my nose with her small finger again. I fought the urge to kiss her forehead and smile at her, or do anything that would suggest I loved having her around. This would only give incentive for my parents and Alice to keep her around longer. Jasper was right, I was starting to feel protective over her. There was no denying that. But that was nothing more than my pity for her. She was an orphan at the age of 6, who had gone through a very traumatic incident. Her charm had nothing to do with that. I would keep telling myself that until I believe it. Bella wouldn't sit with anyone else during the car ride home, wailing the moment I passed her on to someone else. I scowled, stepping into the back seat with Bella in my lap, smiling contentedly. Emmett chuckled at this, and I merely glared at him. Cheer up, bro. She likes you, he teased. I rolled my eyes and looked down at the little girl. She was incredibly beautiful. I still couldn't read her mind, though, and that annoyed me more than it scared me. She was just a human, after all. Baffling as it was, I don't think she posed a threat to us. We, on the other hand, could harm her in so many different ways. Just her presence among us was dangerous. We, especially Jasper, had been able to hold back for so long because we'd not only gone on our hunts recently, and because Bella was still a child. Her scent was very weak and had little effect on us. Even so, I could feel the temptation, no matter how small, every time I caught a whiff of her freesia scent. I couldn't even begin to explain the dangers on her life if other vampires found out about her. Edward? Bella poked at my shoulder. I blinked down at her, focusing on the present. Why are your eyes golden? I shared a panicked look with Rosalie sitting next to me. We were both helplessly trying to figure out what to tell her. Finally, it was Carlisle in the driver's seat that answered. "It's a family thing, Bella. We all have the same eye color," he explained. Bella nodded, then frowned. "Does that mean I'm not family?" she inquired, her brown eyes wondering. "Why do you say that?" Rosalie asked in a motherly voice I had never heard her use before. "My eyes are not golden." Rosalie laughed and ruffled Bella's brown locks. "Silly Bella," she said. "Eye color doesn't make you family. We love you. That's all that matters." Bella brightened up at this. "You love me?" Rosalie nodded, reaching forward to peck Bella's cheek. I squirmed uncomfortably in my seat. Good God, can't they see how dangerous that is? We finally reached the house, and Bella's eyes widened. "You live here?" she asked, shocked. Emmett laughed and nodded his head. "Come on, human girl. Let's go inside." I hissed at Emmett for his choice of words, and he stopped in his tracks, realizing his mistake far too late. Bella was staring at him, confused. "He's playing around, Bella," Rosalie said quickly. "Emmett likes to do that." Esme, Alice, and Jasper haven't returned from their trips yet, so the house was empty. Rose, Carlisle, and I decided to give her a tour of the house. "This is my room," Rosalie announced as we stepped into the room. Emmett cleared his throat, and she rolled her eyes. "This is our room," she amended. We showed her Alice and Jasper's room, and Carlisle and Esme's room. Then came Jasper's study and Carlisle's office. There was, of course, the living room, the dining room, and the backyard which Esme had turned into a garden. My room came last. She smiled when we stepped into the dark interiors of my room. "This is my room," I announced quietly. Bella squirmed in my grip, and I set her down gently on her feet. She took off, running towards the black sofa in the middle of the room. On her way, she tripped on the golden carpet. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Clumsy Bella," I thought affectionately in my head before I caught myself. Let's all be thankful that I was the only mind reader in the house. I was by her side before she could cry out, and I lifted her off the ground and sat her in the middle of the sofa. "Are you okay?" I asked, checking to see if she scraped or injured herself. She seemed all right. There was a faint bruise on her knee, though. I couldn't smell any wounds, so I started breathing normally again. Bella nodded her head and looked around the room eagerly. It was bare, mostly, except for the sofa we were both seating on and the music collection I had. The stereo system I just bought was top of the line, too, but I highly doubted Bella would prefer listening to me brag about that. I could see her eyelids drooping, though. She must be tired after all that excitement since the hospital. After a few moments, her eyes flew open, and she looked around the room with wide eyes. I frowned. She was struggling to stay awake.
"Why?"
I picked up the remote control for the stereo and turned it on. Claire de Lune filled the room, and Bella smiled at me. We listened to the melody for a few seconds before Bella crawled over to where I was sitting. I looked at her, too shocked to move. I have had more contact with her than I've had with every human I've come across combined. My cold touch, my golden eyes, my pale skin, the things that scare people when I need to, attracted her. She was impossible. I liked TH song. She trailed off, yawning. She was barely awake anymore. Bella raised a small fist and rubbed her eyes sleepily. I chuckled. "Sleep, Bella," I told her. "It's okay." Bella stared at me for a moment, then she nodded her head, accepting my words. She crawled into my lap, and I held her like I've been doing it for years. Her eyes drifted shut, and a moment later, I could hear her breathing even out, her heartbeat gaining a slow but steady rhythm. I sighed as I looked down at her angelic face. "Bella, what am I going to do with you?" Bella's POV. When I woke up, I was still in Edward's room, on his sofa. I really liked his room a lot. It's all golden, just like him. and he has a lot of CDs. The one he put on before I went to sleep was very nice and soothing. Edward was standing by his window when I woke up. His arms were crossed in front of him, and he was looking at me. I couldn't tell what he was thinking or feeling because he didn't smile or frown. I blushed when I realized that he had placed a golden comforter around me. It was the same color as his eyes. I fingered the soft material and whispered, "Thank you." When I looked up, Edward gave me a little crooked half-smile. After a moment, he said, "Come on, let's go downstairs. The others are excited to see you again." This got me excited, too. I really liked Edward's family, especially Alice.
She's very happy all the time.
I liked that. I made to climb off the sofa, but I tripped on the carpet again. I heard Edward's laughter beside me, and for a moment, I was too shocked by his presence. Do adults always walk this fast? Then I heard his laughter, really heard it, and wondered why it sounded so wonderful. "Come on, silly Bella," he said, gently lifting me into his arms. I closed my eyes as I yawned slightly, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. When I opened my eyes, we were already in the living room. Everyone was there, looking at me. I blushed. Alice was the first to come up to us. I watched her dance towards us and took me from Edward. "I bought you some things," she said, her amber eyes glinting. I was afraid of what that might meant. I hoped she didn't go to a lot of trouble for me. I didn't want to cause anyone trouble. "Alice, don't scare her too much with your pixie energy," Jasper teased. Alice scowled at him, but calmed down slightly nonetheless. She started to speak, but my stomach growled. Everyone in the room grinned, and I couldn't help but think that they had all heard it. I blushed deep red. Esme chuckled and stepped forward. She smoothed back my hair from my face and smiled tenderly down at me. It reminded me of how my mommy always smiled at me. I blinked up at her. "Are you hungry, Bella?" she asked. I nodded my head, smiling shyly. "What would you like to eat?" I scrunched up my face in concentration. Alice started chuckling, though I didn't know why. I smiled widely and said, "Can I have cookies?" Esme laughed at this and shook her head. "How about I make you a sandwich, and after that I give you some cookies? Will that be all right?"
I thought about this.
Mommy always said I can't eat cookies before eating a proper meal. So I guess this was all right. I nodded my head. "Okay," I agreed, trying not to sound dejected that I'd have to wait for my treat. Alice carried me to the couch and sat down with me in her lap. I started to play with her spiky hair. I liked it. I stared at her in amazement. With her hair and her eager face, shining eyes, bright smile, and tiny body, Alice reminded me of a fairy. I started to giggle. That would be incredible if I were friends with a fairy. "What's so funny?" Alice asked, though her smile widened when I laughed. I shook my head, unable to talk because laughter was taking over me. Alice narrowed her eyes at me and leaned forward. "Won't you tell me?" she asked. I breathed in her sweet scent and immediately became intoxicated by it. It was nowhere near as amazing as Edward's scent, but it was nice enough. I shook my head again at Alice's question. Her grin became impossibly huge as she raised one clawed hand. "Then I'll just have to tickle it out of you," she cried. I squealed, laughing harder, squirming to get away from her. But her tickles only became more insistent. I felt her lithe fingers all over my body, making me laugh. I was starting to hiccup now because I'd been laughing so hard for so long. "Alice, I'm about to die of giggle overload here," Jasper said, laughing almost as hard as I was. Alice snorted, but stopped tickling me. "Sorry, Jazz," she said sweetly. I wrapped my arms around Alice's neck and buried my face in her spiky hair, calming myself down. "Here, dear," I heard Esme said. I turned my face to see her bending over us. a plate of sandwich in one hand and a glass of water in another. I took the water first and gulped down a few sips to get rid of the hiccups. Then I started on the sandwich. Alice and Rosalie played with me while I ate. Esme would reach over and smooth out my hair, and Emmett and Jasper kept making jokes. I hiccuped so much I had to drink 2 glasses of water to calm down. Carlisle smiled a lot and made me think of my dad. Edward was the only one who kept his distance. Whenever I looked over at him, though, he would smile a crooked smile, and I would blush a little, and everything would be okay. But why didn't he say anything or do anything? Finally, I was done with the sandwich and my cookies. Alice started to bounce in her seat. "Bella, do you want to see what I've bought for you?" she asked excitedly. Despite the dread I felt at having someone buying something for me, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of excitement as well. Alice's POV. After Bella has finished her meal, we brought her up to one of the spare rooms in the house. I'd turned it into Bella's room, considering I've seen her future. It was with us. At this, Edward growled in the back of his throat. I rolled my eyes, my back turned to him since I was rushing up the steps as fast as a human could, with Bella in my arms. Grow up, Edward, and accept it. If I could see that far into the future, don't you think it's a good thing then? That none of us hurt her? That she's still safe after all those time? Of course, the future isn't set in stone, but there's no need for me to think that now. Edward was grouchy enough for all of us. We reached the closed door, and I looked at Bella. She looked anxious, a little worried. "Are you ready?" I asked. She hesitated before nodding her head. "Don't worry, you'll love it," I assured her. I'd seen her reaction, of course, the moment I decided what to do with the room. I pushed open the door, and I stepped inside, aware of the others spilling in after us. Esme and Edward were the only ones who didn't gasp. She'd been the one who helped me out, and of course Edward has seen it in our heads. The walls were already painted blue, so we didn't have to change that. I'd gotten silk blue bed sheets and comforters for her, though, and Esme had gotten the shelves and bookcases and toy racks. She had even made a treasure chest which lay closed at the foot of the bed. We were 2 vampires who had 6 hours to work while Bella slept. It was more than enough time. "Is this all for me?" Bella asked incredulously. I nodded my head. "Of course it is, Bella." She smiled widely and hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Although I'd seen this in my vision, I couldn't help but be struck by her maturity. She didn't yell or scream like a normal child. I had no doubt that we would encounter that, especially when she reached her teenage years, but she was still mature for her age. I placed her on the floor, and she ran to the bed. I watched her stumble slightly before catching herself and making the rest of the way to the bed. It was a kid's bed, so it was easy for her to climb on it. I watched her giggle and wriggled under the covers until all we could see was a lump under the covers. I laughed. This was the more playful side of Bella. I liked that. Every child should have a chance to be playful and innocent and silly. While they can, right? Edward said softly, too low for human ears. I turned slightly and frowned at him. "Don't ruin this for her, Edward. It's not just our decision. It's hers, too. Her fate. We've all accepted that." "It's time you do, too," I said quickly, before turning back to look at Bella's moving form under the covers. Emmett stepped forward and called out to her. "Bella, aren't you going to come out?" All he got in reply was a string of playful giggles. "Well, then," he smirked, "I guess we're just going to have to play with all the toys." He stressed on the word. "By ourselves." Bella gasped and threw the covers back. She jumped down from the bed and bounced over to where Emmett was, almost losing her balance more times than I could count. "Toys?" she asked eagerly. We laughed, and I swore I heard Edward chuckling quietly behind me as well. "Good." Emmett and Jasper proceeded to show her the toys they'd gotten for her, all laid out in the treasure chest. Rosalie joined them as well. I'd sent her with the boys. If I hadn't, Bella wouldn't even have one toy meant for a girl. She'd have ended up with video games and soccer balls. Esme, Carlisle, and I watched Bella squeal as she dug through the treasure chest to get to her new toys. Edward watched from outside the doorway, and after a moment, he left. I didn't need Jasper's gift to know that he felt remorseful that Bella would have to live in a house full of vampires. Even if he was determined, it was only for the weekend. Don't be like that, Edward. She loves it here. We love having her here. Is that so bad to have her around? He didn't answer me, but I heard loud rock music blaring from his room. I rolled my eyes again and blocked him out, focusing only on the miracle in front of us. 3. Bella's first Cullen morning. Rosalie's POV. I have never, in my entire existence, felt this happy. Not when I was human and started gaining attention. Not when I thought I was going to gain everything by getting engaged to Royce. Not when I met Emmett. Never. I have always wanted a child. I wanted a little boy, but Bella, she was everything beautiful. I couldn't get enough of her. She was like the daughter I never had. We don't look alike, not at all, but I keep seeing similarities between us. I see her dark hair, and I think of Emmett. I see her wide eyes, beautiful, inquiring, and I think of my own. I see her button nose and her smile, and I hear her laughter, and suddenly I was fantasizing about Bella being Emmett's and my daughter. I try and keep this out of my thoughts whenever Edward was around, but it was hard. For one, he was always around. I knew he was concerned we'd harm Bella, but he was as infatuated with her as the rest of us. Maybe even more. No one loved her more than me. I had to have her. I need her with me. It would kill me to give her up. And to think, it's been less than a day. After Bella had woken up last night, she had eaten her dinner Esme had made for her and seen her room. Alice and Esme decorated it. I didn't have much say in it, but that was all right. I went to the mall with Jasper and Emmett to help pick out Bella's toys and such. I got her dolls and a toy cooking set and a doll house and stuffed animals and everything a little girl would want. I think I ended up buying the whole store. I didn't care. She deserved it. She had played with Jazz, Em, and me for a while before falling asleep in my arms. If I could have cried, I would have. And now, with dawn so near, time has never moved this slow. I wanted it to be morning. I wanted the sun to rise. I wanted to be able to wake Bella up. It seemed everyone in the house was anticipating it. It was driving Jasper crazy, I knew. He kept pacing the living room, sending calming waves to everyone. It did nothing for me. It was so different to have a heartbeat in the house. It was all the more incredible knowing that it was this beautiful 6-year-old girl I could consider a daughter. Her Phrygia scent, her laughter, her human warmth, it made me feel so alive. I touched her, hugged her, kissed her forehead, stroked her hair, and not once did she flinch from me. She could look into my topaz eyes and not be afraid. She could grab onto my cold, marble hand and not run. Her innocence and trust amazed me and made me so happy. We were to keep her until Monday. Child Services would send a representative over. My dead heart broke every time I thought of it. Alice foresaw her future, I knew she did. But she won't tell us anything. I think Edward saw it, though. That's why he's even more agitated than usual. I hoped it wasn't a future where Bella was hurt or killed. I wouldn't be able to stand that. I wanted to ask Carlisle and Esme if we could adopt Bella. I knew their answer would probably be a no. We were vampires eternally damned to live forever. Bella was human. She would grow older, find a human mate, marry, move away, and continue growing older. She would die at some point. I flinched at the very thought, but I still couldn't let her go. Would the rest of us be able to? I saw how attached Alice and Esme already were to Bella. I saw how even Jasper warmed up to her. He wasn't as out of control around her as he was around other humans. He didn't get that mutinous look in his eyes.
Oh, God.
What if we really had to give her up? Would I be able to handle that? Would I be able to endure losing the opportunity to have a child of my own for the second time? You know it's for the best, Rosalie, Edward said quietly. I jumped and swiveled around to glare at my brother. He had come down the stairs so silently that not even I had noticed it. Of course, I had been absorbed. I love her, Edward. I can't explain it. It's only been a few hours and this human child has taken over me so completely. I could love her like a daughter. Don't ask me to give her up, I pleaded. It wasn't like me to plead, to beg. But Edward was Edward. He would do anything to get things the way he wanted them to be. He would throw a tantrum, have a sulky fit, argue until her head spun anything. And being the first son in the family, Carlisle and Esme have always respected his opinions. They had always listened to what he had to say. More often than not, they took his side. But I couldn't allow it this time. Most of the time, I was beyond grateful that I had eternity with Emmett. I had Carlisle to thank for that. If it weren't for him, I would have died and never gotten the chance to exact my revenge on Royce and his buddies. I would have never met Emmett, my true love. I would have never known the love of a real family. But there was that awful pain in the pit of my stomach I could never let go of. The pain of never having a child. I wanted it so badly, it hurt. Bella was my chance. She was my savior. I needed her in my life. I didn't know what would happen in the future, if it was good or bad. If she would move away from us, leave me in my grief, and move on with her human life. I didn't know, but I was willing to give it a try. Even for a little while, if I could have her with me, call her my daughter, give her happiness, then I was willing. Edward stared at me coolly and shook his head.
You know, Rose, he said again.
She's human. We can't keep her. It's not like she's a stray puppy. She'll grow up, and she'd have to have a normal life. That's what's best for her. He was determined.
You don't know that.
I snapped. I couldn't keep my cool. Who the hell was he to tell me that I had to let go of her? I felt a wave of calmness settle over me and shot Jasper a murderous glare. He was unabashed. I need you two to calm down, he groaned. I can't take it.
Can't take it. Yes.
That was how I felt every time I thought of never being able to conceive. Every moment of happiness I spent with Emmett was tinged with sadness over never being able to give him that, never being able to have that. What about what we are? Edward retorted. I flinched at his flat tone. It was like he didn't even care. What about her finding out? Have you ever thought about that? Do you think she'll want us after we tell her? What he meant to say was, did I think she'll want me after we tell her about us? I turned away from him, shutting my eyes so no one could see the hurt in them. I felt like sobbing, but of course, I couldn't shed tears. Hey, Emmett said. It was one of those rare times when he sounded serious. Back off, Edward. All right? Let's just get through the weekend first. I heard him sigh, heard the apology in that one insignificant noise. I'm sorry, Rose, he muttered. I didn't answer him, nor did I turn around to face him, or any of them. I walked over to the window facing the mountains and sat down on the ledge. I stared out into the darkness and waited for dawn. Bella's POV. Sunlight was streaming in through the blue curtains when I woke up. I sat up in bed and stretched, yawning. I blinked, adjusting to the sudden brightness. There was a knock at the door, and I started, calling out to whomever it was to come in. Rosalie and Alice came into the room, Alice bounding in like an excited fairy. I smiled widely at them. Rose sat on the edge of the bed, and I immediately crawled into her lap. I really liked her. She was very pretty and nice to me. They all were. But Rose always treated me like my mommy did. She would hold me and hug me and kiss my hair. I felt safe around her. "What do you want to do today, Bella?" Alice asked excitedly.
I thought about this.
What should I do today? I didn't feel like going out because I was still tired and a little sore from my bruises. I wanted to stay inside the house, play with my new toys, and just rest. I was still sad from losing Mommy and Daddy. I knew heaven was a good place, but I won't be able to see them anymore. I tugged on Rose's sleeve, and she looked down at me. "Will I be able to visit Mommy and Daddy in heaven?" I whispered quietly. I had the feeling that I shouldn't ask this question, at least not so loudly. Rose looked pained for a moment, then she gave me a sad smile and smoothed back my hair. "I'm sorry, baby, but no," she leaned forward and kissed my forehead. I felt tears welling in my eyes and closed my eyes so Rose and Alice wouldn't see. I snuggled deeper into Rose's arms and rested my head on her chest, breathing in her sweet scent. After a moment, I felt myself calming down. It was the strangest feeling ever, like suddenly I knew everything would be okay. I knew it was all right to be sad, but it would be better soon. I felt like my heart was lighter. I opened my eyes and blinked.
My tears were gone.
Alice smiled at me, crouching down in front of Rose and me. She took my small hands in hers and kissed my knuckles, smiling brightly at me. It wasn't a fake smile, the way I knew some people felt obliged to give me just because I was little. So I smiled back. It was infectious enough. "I have an idea," she said. "What about if we just stay at home today? We could watch movies, play with your new toys." She rattled off the things that we could do in a sing-song voice. I liked the sound of what she had in mind. I started to nod my head slowly. I could do that. Play dress up. I cringed at that. All right, maybe I didn't like everything that she had in mind. Alice didn't notice my cringe, still going on and on about the clothes that she had bought for me and what fun we would have playing dress up. Rose did, though, and laughed. "Take it slow, Alice. We wouldn't want to traumatize her." Alice stuck her tongue out at Rose, and I felt a fresh burst of giggles escaping me. She was acting just like me when I felt playful. Alice smiled at this and raised an eyebrow. "Does that sound okay with you?" she asked hopefully, her bright topaz eyes glinting. I nodded my head. Except for dress up, I made a face. Rose and Alice burst out laughing, and I smiled widely at them both. "Let's get you some breakfast, then." Jasper's POV. She smelled enticing. I've never been this close to a human before and not end up drinking their blood. But she was different. The love and affection I felt for her was multiplied through my gift. I felt everyone's affections for her. It was still hard for me to control myself, but I tried. I've never been more in control of my actions as I was at this point, in my opinion. Edward said it might have something to do with the fact that Bella was still a child, and her scent wasn't as strong. I think he's right, and if we get to keep her longer, I would hopefully be desensitized by the time she was older. We all would be. I was amazed at the tenor of my family's feelings towards her. I wasn't at all surprised by Rosalie's reaction. She had always wanted a child of her own. And now suddenly, a human girl was presented to us, beautiful, innocent, untouched, warm, and loving. It was her dream come true. I was still shocked by the fierce love I felt coursing through her. It broke her heart to think of giving Bella up. Emmett was just happy that Rose was happy. He was glad to see her so loving and motherly towards Bella. To him, Bella was a miracle, a gift. And he was glad he could be around her, play with her. He was just as excited as I was. Alice was beyond control with her happiness. She wanted to buy Bella clothes and shower her with gifts. She wanted to spoil Bella and be her best friend. She couldn't wait for Bella to grow up so that she could see what sort of a girl she would turn out to be. I had no doubts she'd already seen it, but that probably just added to her excitement. But she also wanted Bella to stay a child for as long as possible. Her innocence was a virtue. Carlisle felt the same way as Emmett. Esme was so happy to have Bella in the house. She'd lost her own child when she was human, the last straw that led to her suicide. He was seeing her healing up and was astonished that a 6-year-old human girl could heal his wife the way no one else had ever been able to. Edward was Edward. He was stubborn and refused to believe that anything good would come out of it. Rose called it selfishness. I called it selflessness. He wanted to protect Bella, whether he admitted it or not. Alice said he would in time. I knew she saw something else, but she never shared it with me or with anyone else. Judging from the frustration I felt from Edward, she was keeping it a secret from him, too. But he was affected by her. He wanted to protect her. The very idea of him wanting the best for Bella already proved that. I think even Rosalie knew that deep down, and that's why she hadn't really lashed out at him. I sighed impatiently for Alice and Rosalie to bring Bella down. I could hear their conversation upstairs as clearly as if I was right there next to them. Edward was sitting at his piano, playing the moodiest songs I've ever heard him play on that thing. Esme was busy in the kitchen, making a breakfast big enough to feed an army. She didn't know what Bella wanted, and she wanted to make sure everything was available. Carlisle was pacing the living room, anticipating Bella. He was anxious to see what her progress was like as an interested father figure and as her doctor. She had suffered a traumatic experience at such a young age. Emmett couldn't wait to see if she would stumble again. Her clumsiness amused him. Alice and Rose were helping Bella into the bath, and I heard Bella chat animatedly with the both of them about school. It was the summer holidays at this point, so we didn't have to worry about that yet. According to Edward, we didn't have to worry about that at all, considering it was the middle of July and school started in September. He wholeheartedly believed Bella would be gone by then. It saddened him to think that, although he would never admit that, but he still believed it true. I knew better than to bet against my Alice. Finally, I heard Alice and Rose bringing Bella down the stairs. I caught sight of my Alice carrying Bella in her arms, and my breath caught. She looked so beautiful. A child in her arms, a perfect picture. Alice set Bella down on the couch, where she wriggled into a comfortable position. She was wearing a blue sundress that ended at her knees, and her long brown hair hung in waves around her shoulders. She really was an adorable human. When she stopped fidgeting and looked up, she saw the rest of us looking at her. Bella blushed and looked down shyly. Esme came out of the kitchen and sat next to Bella, smiling. "Good morning, dear," Esme greeted her. "Morning," Bella mumbled, picking at the fabric of her dress. She looked up once more to glance around the room curiously. Everyone was crowding around her now. Even Edward had stopped playing the piano and had come to join us. He sat on a lone armchair, away from where Bella and Esme sat. I smirked. "You can't fool me, Edward. You love having her around." He ignored me, but I caught a flash of annoyance anyway. Esme asked Bella what she wanted to eat. Bella wrinkled her nose and scrunched her face in concentration. Adorable. Her face lit up as she made a decision. "Waffles," she cried happily. Esme laughed, kissing Bella's forehead lightly before heading gracefully back into the kitchen. Carlisle asked Bella if he could check her bruises to see if she was feeling any better. Bella nodded her head and allowed him, though her bottom lip quivered as he examined her. Carlisle was gentle with her. He'd had years of practice being a doctor to humans. But she was little, after all. It couldn't be easy for her to be in pain. Something in her caught my off guard. Embarrassment. She was embarrassed at being hurt. Her pride was wounded. I stared at her in surprise. Even at such a young age, she hated to show weakness. How intriguing. Esme came back into the living room with a glass of milk in one hand and a plate of waffles in another. Alice was already turning on the TV and pulling out DVDs of children's shows I never thought we had. She'd probably gotten them yesterday at the mall. Alice thought of everything. God, I love her. Bella began to forget her embarrassment and her shyness as she ate her breakfast and watched the cartoons. At this moment, all conflict, all pain, all confusion, indecisiveness, and anger in my family were gone. All that was left was contentment. That was when I swore never to let anything happen to Bella. Edward's POV. Jasper was right. In the past 20 hours, I'd become attached to Bella. I never showed it. I never went anywhere near her if I didn't need to. I let the others crowd around her and spoil her and treat her like the miracle she was. But I felt it. The affection, the love, I could hear it in their thoughts, and they somewhat mirrored mine. Was this how they felt? I couldn't tell simply by their thoughts. I couldn't tell the intensity of their emotions. I didn't have Jasper's gift, but I felt my own emotions surging through me. Her scent was stronger to me than to any one of them. I didn't know why. If it were simply because I was one of the first to find her, Carlisle should have had the same reaction to her as well. Maybe it was because he has better self-control than I do. She was amazing. I couldn't stop looking at her. Something about her captivated me and unnerved me at the same time. I still couldn't read her thoughts. Something Carlisle said might change in the future. Emphasis on the might. He said it might be because of her grief of losing her parents. She might have shut down. That was highly unlikely. I hated to admit it, but Jasper was right. I wanted to protect Bella from everything. I wanted her to keep her innocence. I wanted her to be safe all the time. But a tiny part of me was too selfish to see her go.
You can't fool me, Edward.
You love having her around. I heard Jasper's blaring thoughts. I resisted the urge to scowl and tried to distract myself. Unfortunately, her freesia scent only filled my head with thoughts of her. Would it be so bad to have Bella around? She was already making our lives better. I have never seen Esme and Rosalie so happy. I'd never seen Alice so excited about shopping, and that was saying something. Emmett was showing a rare tender side that I was half afraid of because it was so unlike him. Jasper's self-restraint was admirable at this point, though I stuck by my theory of her scent being weak due to her age. Carlisle was excited too, and so happy to see Esme healing from her wounds. And I was just trying to protect Bella. She was too sweet to be anything but. If she were to go out there into the world, all on her own, would she be able to fend for herself? Would she make it out there? She was an orphan. She would be given to a foster home. I didn't have experience with foster homes, but I knew of the system. It was terrible, and the families the children were given to weren't always respectable. Sometimes the children were beaten, abused in various ways, mistreated. Could I think of this sweet angel being abused that way? No, I couldn't. The anger flaring within me at the mere thought of that had Jasper in panic, shooting wave after wave of tranquility at me. I breathed out through clenched teeth and forced myself to calm down. It would do no good to scare Bella. She was only a child. I didn't want to scar her for life because of an outburst. It would be scary to a little child, I knew. So no, foster homes might not be such a good idea. And if Bella had any relatives, the hospital would have already contacted them. But she didn't. She was all alone. But was this a better fate for her? Living in a house full of vampires? Monsters who were cursed to drink blood to sustain? Was this her destiny? No, I had to find an alternative. I had to make sure she had the best possible life. And yet, gazing at her sweet face, looking into her chocolate eyes, seeing the blush that stained her cheeks when she saw me looking at her, I couldn't help but give in, just for a second, to my selfish side. 4 vote. Alice's POV. Can I just say how incredible it was to have Bella around? I could almost feel the atmosphere in the house lighten. And I didn't even have Jazz's gift. The past few days have been heaven for us. We spent all of Friday lounging at home, watching movies and playing with Bella. I couldn't remember a more normal time in my life. I hung out with my family all the time, but there was always the supernatural aspect to it. If we played a game, someone would try to cheat. If we raced, we used vampire speed. Our normal day together would be Esme planting in the garden, Carlisle in his office, Jazz and I in front of the TV with Emmett. I know what you're thinking. I do not help Jazz cheat during video games, all right once. Edward practicing his piano and Rose in the garage. Whenever we had movie nights, it was always filled with Cullen family moments. I loved those, but none of them could compare to Bella. She was so innocent. I loved her. I already saw her future. I knew she would be living with us. And I knew Edward had partially given in. I just needed to push him in the right direction a little more. In time, he'll accept it. And Bella was enthusiastic about her new toys, her new room, and her new family. She was so inquisitive. She kept asking questions like why our eyes look so different from other people. Edward would have made this into a smug, I told so comment had Bella been older and had a longer attention span. The moment the question was out of her mouth, she was asking another one already. Why was Emmett so big? Why did she feel so calm whenever Jasper's around? Why was my hair spiky? Didn't Edward want to play too? Can't we watch Tom and Jerry? The mouse was always so funny. Could Esme please make pasta for lunch? We didn't actually have to answer any of them. She was too adorable, really. Even I was having a hard time keeping up with her. As a 6-year-old girl, it was understandable that she would have a lot of energy. But I think Jasper had something to do with this. Either way, it didn't matter. I fought the urge to get her to change into something else when the clock struck 5. Why limit her to one outfit a day? I think I wore Jasper out with my eagerness. Thank God no one could protest when it was time for Bella to bathe and change into pajamas. I was so glad I was able to shop for her. Once the child services issue was settled on Monday, I was hoping I could take her out to the mall, get her to pick out a few things with my help, of course. Edward was still trying to fight the reality that Bella was here to stay. Honestly, why he bothered to bet against me is beyond any of us. I was never wrong, and I never will be. It was Saturday night now, 2.5 days since Bella had entered our lives. It has been nothing but euphoric. Rose, Esme, and I were crowded around Bella's bed, tucking her in for the night. Esme had to read her a bedtime story and put on Edward's Debussy CD, or she won't be able to sleep. Claire de Lune figures Edward would get her addicted to one of his classic songs. Tonight, Esme was reading Cinderella. We were at the part where Cinderella and the prince were reunited. Bella had a happy smile on her face, and her eyes were drooping. She was almost snoring right then. 12 seconds, I whispered, too low for Bella's human ears to pick up. Esme nodded and closed the book while Rose grabbed the remote control from the dresser and pressed play. Claire de Lune played softly from the stereo Edward had gotten for Bella. I smirked as I thought of it. Bella hadn't been able to get much sleep yesterday night until Edward played Claire de Lune on his stereo. That had prompted Bella to fall asleep on his couch. When we brought her to her room and tucked her in her bed, she woke up and started wailing for Edward. She'd spent the entire night in his room, listening to playbacks of the same song. Edward had gone out to bless the stormy weather and bought the stereo for Bella. It looked like Bella would be able to sleep peacefully tonight after all. In 12 seconds, just like I'd predicted, Bella had fallen asleep. We each said our goodnights, kissing Bella softly on the forehead, and heading out the door. I made sure to turn on Bella's nightlight. She was afraid of the dark, something Emmett found incredibly hilarious. We all headed downstairs. Everyone, including Edward, was sitting in the living room. She's asleep, Esme stated proudly. So we heard, Emmett said in relief. He'd panicked last night when Bella started wailing uncontrollably in her bed. I would have laughed at the sight of the big, strong Emmett pacing the room with alarm, thinking of ways to calm her down, half of which weren't even logical, might I add. I joined Jasper on the love seat, and Rose and Esme sat next to the significant others as well. We fell into a peaceful silence, listening to Bella's breathing and her steady heartbeat upstairs. Oh, Bella. Did she have any idea just how wonderful life was just because she was here? Carlisle was the first to speak up. He cleared his throat, gaining all of our attention. Most of you need to hunt, he said, looking at us all. Edward and I have gone hunting Thursday, as you know. Esme, you take the kids out tomorrow. He nodded at his wife, who smiled at him and kissed him briefly. I smiled at their tender moment before Carlisle's words caught up to me.
Wait, what?
I nearly shrieked. Esme and Rose both glared at me. Show, Rose chided. I lowered my voice. I don't want to leave Bella. I whined. Carlisle chuckled. I know, Alice, he said gently. But it'll only be a day. Not only for Bella's sake, but also for Monday. Everyone except Edward, and I gave him quizzical looks. I'd already known what he would be saying next. Child Services will be sending someone by the house on Monday, he told us. The room became even more silent now than ever, and I felt tension seep back. The air felt heavier. Will they take Bella's? Rosalie asked, her voice strained. I shot her a reassuring smile. Carlisle shook his head. I'm not sure about that yet, Rose. We're going to have to decide what to do before they get here. He murmured the last part almost to himself. Emmett raised an eyebrow, looking around confusedly. What do you mean decide what to do? He asked. Carlisle sighed. He stood up and started to pace. We have to decide if we're going to allow Child Services to place Bella in the foster system, or... He shot Edward a quick look before turning away. Or if we keep her... Rosalie brightened up almost immediately. Can we do that? She asked eagerly. Emmett wrapped his arm around her shoulder and rubbed her arm encouragingly. Carlisle ignored her question and continued to pace. I could see Rosalie fighting the urge to spring from her seat and shake the answer from Carlisle. I think Emmett was holding her down with his arm. I held back a giggle. Was she forgetting my vision? Carlisle. Rosalie snapped, impatient. Carlisle jumped a little, startled. He smiled sheepishly at her and took his rightful seat next to Esme. He took a deep breath and slowly let it out. Was he trying to get on Rosalie's bad side? The way she was fuming now, glaring daggers at him, was enough to send any sane being running in the opposite direction. But Carlisle was our father, and more importantly, older than Rose. He wasn't afraid of her. What he was more afraid of was Edward's temper. We'd have to take a vote, he said quietly. Edward's head snapped to Carlisle, and he glared at him. Carlisle held up a hand to stem any protests. Edward, this decision is conflicted. I have to know what the others think before we make a decision. Carlisle Edward begun, his voice dripping with disapproval. Please, Edward, just hear what they have to say, Esme pleaded with her son, giving him a full motherly look. I knew Edward would never contradict Esme. True enough, he sighed and settled back in his seat, though his shoulders were tense, awaiting what the rest of us had to say. Alice, Carlisle prompted. I took a deep breath and shot Edward a sharp look.
You already know what I think, I said.
I've seen Bella, alive and healthy with us. She's meant to be with us. My vote is yes. Jasper, I won't contradict Alice. Besides, this family is a whole lot more complete with Bella in it. Your emotions are euphoric at this point. It's a good feeling, he smiled. I leaned into him, encouraging him to vote. Yes. Emmett, the squirt is too cute, he exploded. Show. Rose jabbed him in the ribs. He smiled sheepishly and said, "I vote hell yeah." I giggled at his exuberance. Edward shut his eyes, as if not wanting to see an unsightly scene. Rosalie. She had calmed down enough to snuggle back into Emmett. Seeing the rest of us leaning towards keeping Bella in the family had pacified her. She hesitated for a while, biting her lip. "I love her," she said quietly, looking up at us. "She's the daughter I never had. I want her with me. I know it's selfish of me to want her around all of this." She waved dejectedly around us. "But I can't help it. I'm not saying we condemn her to our life. I'm just saying protect her.
We don't know what's out there.
Humans could be even more cruel than vampires. More cruel than us, most definitely. We would protect her, love her, give her everything, and if one day she decides to leave," Rosalie broke off, taking a deep breath, "then at least we'd given her all we could." She smiled, confident of her vote.
"I vote yes."
Emmett kissed her on the cheek, and I heard her let out the breath she was holding. Carlyle smiled at her in that fatherly way of his and turned to Esme. "Esme," he asked. I knew there was a reason he was asking Edward last. He knew Edward would say no. He was already pinching the bridge of his nose, leaning forward in his seat as if he was in physical pain. Esme smiled softly, staring at a spot on the wall. I knew she was thinking of Bella. "I vote yes," she said, automatically reaching for Carlyle's hand. "I vote yes, too, Edward," Carlyle announced. "No." Edward shot out of his seat, glaring at all of us, breathing heavily. Jasper stood up as well, and by the look of concentration on his face, I could tell he was trying to calm Edward. "I don't think it was working." "We're vampires," he snapped. "You don't say," Emmett said sarcastically. Edward glared at him, but Emmett didn't back down. "We have no right to keep her. What if we snap? What if others," he stressed on the word, "to prove its significance?" I could almost feel a collective wince as the others realized his meaning. "Find out about her? At some point in time, she's either going to find out or we'll have to tell her about us. Why we move around so much, why we never age, why we don't go out in the sun. You think the Volturi will let her live? A human who knows of our existence," he spat out. Even I had no idea what to say to this. I hadn't seen this part of Bella's future, and it was wavering. My vision was wavering. Edward's words were striking a chord with the others. They were wondering now if keeping Bella would be the best solution. Edward's voice softened the slightest bit. "You don't know that she won't find a good home, a proper one, with loving humans. You don't know that she'd grow up and have a perfectly normal life. We have no right. It's not up to us," he concluded. "My vote is no." Edward's POV. He has a point. The Volturi won't be happy. I'm sure I could sway Arrow. If he finds out, that is to say. I'm sure we could keep her secret. Arrow is an old friend. Surely he would sympathize. I won't let anyone, including the damn Volturi, hurt my daughter. But she's been so good for us. Maybe Edward's right. Maybe we are being selfish, keeping her around just because it finally felt like we're living instead of surviving. Oh, and I was getting so good at cooking. I do wish Bella could stay. She's my second chance. My baby died. I wouldn't want the same fate for Bella. I want her safe. Was it too illogical to think that we could protect her? Surely not. The vision's changing. Why is it changing? Damn you, Edward. Alice jumped out of her seat, her eyes wild. No, she said, shaking her head. The Volturi won't be pleased, but we could sway them, strike a deal, something. But Bella is safest here with us. I opened my mouth to protest, but Alice turned her death glare on me. You think you know it all, Edward. But you don't. I'm the one who sees the future. I'm the one who knows how her life is supposed to play out. She's been through hell, and she's only 6. Foster systems and strange humans aren't a part of her future. I won't let it. My vote is yes, Alice said firmly. She means too much. You could stick with your vote, Edward, but I want the others to say if they've changed their minds or not. Her eyes challenged me, and when she gazed at them, her eyes challenged them as well. I could see their train of thoughts in my head and fought to stay calm. I've made a promising argument. Surely they won't just dismiss it. But slowly, I watched in horror as Alice's vision solidified in her mind. Her original vision of Bella playing in our living room when she was 8. I saw flashes of one vision after another. Bella sleeping in her room. Bella reading in Carlisle's study. Bella getting a piggyback ride from Emmett. Bella getting her hair brushed by Rosalie. Bella frowning at the shopping bags in Alice's arms. Bella smiling as she hugged me tightly, her tiny form reaching my waist only. She was staying. Defeated, I slumped back into my head, closing my eyes so I wouldn't have to see the others. Yes, Alice cheered. Bella's staying. I opened my eyes to see Carlisle smiling. I'll call and tell them we'll be adopting Bella, he agreed. I sighed. Carlisle adopted a serious expression then. Well, off you go to hunt, he said to the others. I would be staying behind with Carlisle to look after Bella. We'd both just hunted since Tuesday. We were living in a pretty secluded area just outside Forks. Carlisle wasn't sure how long we would be staying, and he refused to ask Alice. So he had started working at the hospital, even though we were only here to stay until our home in Alaska had gone through all the necessary renovations. Alice, Jasper, Emmett, Rose, and I had also just finished school a year ago in England, right before we moved, so we didn't particularly want to go back yet. Unfortunately, when we got to Alaska, we have to resume school. It was part of our charade. We had to evade suspicion. 5 teenagers being homeschooled was definitely suspicious enough. At Carlisle's words, the others started to grumble. Carlisle shook his head, though I saw the quirk of his lips as he fought the urge to grin at their antics.
No.
You know you need to hunt, he said sternly. Can't we stay until morning? Say goodbye to Bella first. Emmett pleaded. Please, Carlisle? Esme asked him sweetly. I rolled my eyes. Once Esme used that tone, Carlisle was putty in her hands. He sighed and agreed. Like I said, putty in her hands. I stood up and went up the stairs. I could hear what the others were thinking. They thought I was going to my room to pout and sulk and be moody. Alice knew better, of course, but she blocked out her thoughts, so I couldn't hear her smugness. Thank God for that. I climbed up the stairs and was in front of Bella's bedroom door in 2 seconds flat. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open her door and stepped inside. It was dark, though that didn't deter me. I could see even better in the dark than I could in the day. There was a night light in the corner, casting an almost orange glow in the room. Bella was snoring softly into her pillow. I stepped closer to her and kneeled down next to her head. I stared at her sleeping form, her seraphic face. Why was it that she captivated me? Why was it so easy for her to steal the hearts of 7 vampires? All she had to do was waltz into the room, and we were willing to give our lives for her. Yes, I was willing too. She meant more to me than I could understand. I was a mess inside. One moment, I was thinking of how she smelt so wonderful. Her Phrygia-scented blood was just too tantalizing. The next moment, I was thinking how I'd protect her from anything and everything. The next moment, I was wondering if giving her up would be the best option, and the next I wanted nothing more than to yell out, yes. My vote is yes. I sighed softly and smiled at her. Ah, Bella, what am I going to do with you? Bella's POV. I woke up to find Rose, Esme, Alice, Emmett, and Jasper crowding around my bed. I started to laugh. They were the strangest, but funniest people I've ever met. We have to go, Bella, Alice said sadly. I frowned. Go where's? I couldn't help but whine. Were they going to leave me? Rose laid down next to me and wrapped an arm around me. We have to go run an errand today, she said. Errand? It's what Mommy called having to go grocery shopping and going to the bank. We'll be back at night, but really late. So you probably won't see us until tomorrow morning. I bit my lip, thinking, well, if they had to go out, then why did I have to stay at home? Couldn't I come? I pouted. Rose laughed, shaking her head. You stay at home, okay?
Get better.
Edward and Carlisle will be staying with you, so you can play with them, okay? I broke out into a grin. Edward was staying? I nodded my head. Okay. I was still sad. They were leaving me for an entire day.
I was just so used to seeing them by now.
They never left my side when I was awake the past few days. They were my best friends. Don't worry, we'll bring you out with us one day, okay? Alice promised, taking one of my hands in hers. We could go to the mall or the park or anywhere you want. Okay? I nodded my head, smiling widely at her. Have fun, I mumbled as they kissed me on the forehead one by one, then filed out of my room, waving at me. I sat up in my bed and looked around the empty room. What was I going to do now? Then I smiled. It was time to find Edward. Edward wasn't in his room. Did he leave with the others, too? I was about to cry when I heard the soft music of the piano. I smiled. He was downstairs. I trudged softly down the hall and made my way carefully down the stairs. I'd always been clumsy. I didn't want to trip and fall down the stairs. I almost made it all the way when I slipped on the last step. I fell down flat on my face. I felt the sting on my knee and the pain shooting up my ankle and started to cry. Edward was by my side in an instant and picked me up. I buried my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in his scent. It has always helped me to calm down. Maybe it would help me now. But the pain was getting worse. I sobbed harder. Bella, he said, panicking. Bella, are you all right? I shook my head against his cold skin. Why on earth was he so cold? Did he want a blanket to keep warm? Mommy said it wasn't good to be cold, otherwise you might get sick. I want to point this out to him, but the pain in my left leg was overtaking me. Bella, tell me, his pained voice pleaded me. Without looking up or pulling away, I mumbled, my leg bent to his neck. He shifted me in his arms gently and took a look. Oh, Bella, he sighed. Carlisle, could you come down a second? He called out. He spoke normally, but Carlisle was already climbing down the steps. What is it, Edward? He asked, his voice worried. Hello, Bella. He greeted me. I didn't turn around to look at him. She fell down, Edward told him. I bit my lip as I felt a familiar blush coloring my cheeks. Why did I have to be so clumsy? I think she sprained her ankle. Could you have a look at it?
Certainly.
Carlisle attempted to take me from Edward's grip, but I whimpered, hugging Edward tightly. Carlisle chuckled slightly. All right, how about you sit on Edward's lap while I take a look at your leg? Would that be better, Bella? He asked gently. I nodded my head, my face still buried in Edward's neck. Carlisle left to take his medical kit, and Edward carried me to the couch. He sat down and cradled me against his chest. Are you in a lot of pain? He asked quietly, his face a grimace. I studied him. He looked upset that I was hurt, and I didn't want to make him upset. So I shook my head. It's okay, I whispered. I fall down a lot. But my angel didn't look as if he believed me. He stroked my hair, and I closed my eyes, resting the side of my head against his chest. Strange. I couldn't feel his heartbeat the way I could with Mommy and Daddy sometimes. Before I could ask, Carlisle was already coming towards us. I squirmed in Edward's lap. I knew Carlisle was a good person, and I liked him. He reminded me a lot of Daddy, but he was a doctor. I hate doctors. I hate going to the hospital. When he opened his bag and plunged his hand inside, I blurted out, "No needles." Carlyle raised an eyebrow at me and smiled amusedly. I flushed a furious red. "I don't like needles," I mumbled, dropping my gaze. Edward chuckled and kissed my forehead softly. "I promise he won't use needles, Bella," he said. I looked up into his twinkling topaz eyes and smiled. Carlyle examined the scrape on my knee and my slightly swollen ankle. "It's sprained," he confirmed. He bandaged up my ankle and placed a Band-Aid on my knee. I felt a vibration near Edward's abdomen and watched as he took out a tiny silver cell phone from his shirt pocket. "Alice," he said exasperatedly.
No, she's fine.
"Really?" "I'm not. Why would I do that?" He sounded angry. I shot a look at Carlyle, but looked like he was about to start laughing. What was going on? Edward handed me the phone. "Alice wants to talk to you," he said. I took the tiny phone and placed it at my ear. "Bella, how's the day so far?" I heard her melodious voice. "Fine," I replied. I fell down. I frowned at that. I wondered if all children fell down all the time. It didn't seem likely my friends at school didn't fall as much as I did. "Are you okay?" I held the phone away from my ear for a little while. How could she be so loud?
Yes.
"Carlyle didn't use needles," I announced happily. Edward and Carlyle both laughed at this. "We'll be back by tomorrow, okay, Bella? When you wake up, we'll be there," she promised. I nodded my head before remembering that she couldn't see me. "Okay," I sighed, settling back into Edward's chest. "Have fun, Alice," I smiled. I gave the phone back to Edward, who shut it off. He smiled down at me, a big, crooked grin that made me blush for some reason. "What would you like for breakfast, Bella?" 5. Meadows and Visions. Alice's POV. The vision of Bella falling down the stairs took me completely by surprise and allowed the lion I was targeting to escape. I rolled my eyes, too worried to care, and took out my cell phone. Thank God Rosalie was nowhere in sight. She'd barge straight home if she knew. "Edward!" I shrieked into the phone, trying my level best to keep from shouting at vampire volume. Rose would definitely hear that. "What's this I see about Bella falling? Is she hurt? Is she okay? Why didn't you check up on her the moment we left? Where is she?" I could hear the exasperation in his voice as he sighed my name, trying to keep my questions from overflowing. "Don't you sigh at me. Edward Cullen." I fumed. "Is she badly hurt?" "No, she's fine," Edward replied. I breathed out in relief. "Really? Really? Are you lying to me?" "I'm not," came his defensive reply. "Why would I do that?" I shrugged my shoulders, sensing Jasper approaching me. He would be next to me in 3 seconds. "I don't know. To pacify me for one? To keep me from yelling at you for your stupidity?" I snapped back. I could practically see Edward fuming. Jasper slipped his hand in mine, and I immediately felt him calming me. I shot him a grateful look. I sighed. "I'm sorry, Edward. I'm just worried for her, that's all. Could you please put Bella on the phone?" I asked sweetly. I knew he wouldn't hold it against me. I heard the phone being passed to Bella and said, "Bella, how's the day so far?" I couldn't just ask her if she was alright. Edward hadn't called me. I'd called him. It would be suspicious, even to a 6-year-old, and especially to Bella. She was much too observant for her own good. A moment later, I heard Bella's sweet voice in my ear. I smiled.
"Fine."
I fell down. I heard the sadness in her voice at the mention of falling down and felt my own dead heart break. Why were we so protective of her? This little girl had gotten us all to love her within 2.5 days. Amazing. "Are you okay?" I knew Edward wouldn't lie, but I still needed to hear it from her.
"Yes."
Carlisle didn't use needles.
She sounded happy about that.
Well, it was to be expected that children wouldn't enjoy having needles being poked through their skin. We'll be back by tomorrow, okay, Bella? When you wake up, we'll be there. Okay, I heard her sigh. Have fun, Alice. I closed the phone and turned to Jasper. He also had a worried look on his face, hearing Bella said that she fell. But he was calm, knowing she was all right. I missed Bella already. Her sweet voice, her angelic face, her deep brown eyes. I sighed. Have fun? Hardly. I gripped at Jazz's hand, ready to track a new prey.
The vision hit me then.
Hard and fast. A 16-year-old Bella, dancing in Edward's arms, both gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Another vision hit me the moment that one ended. A 17-year-old Bella, wrapped in Edward's embrace, their lips moving together against each other's mouths, their bodies glued together, their faces glowing. Then Edward pulled back and said, "I love you, Bella." She smiled lovingly at him, her gentle, human fingers caressing his face softly. "I love you too, Edward," I gasped, blinking. I was back in the present. Edward and Bella. Together? Oh, I slowed down to a stop, and Jasper looked at me, confused by my sudden behavior. Edward and Bella would fall in love with each other. How was this possible? Was it possible?
Oh, wow.
Then I started to smile, jumping up and down. This was great. I knew Edward's love for Bella wasn't very brotherly. He looked at her differently, like she was something he needed to protect beyond reason. But in love, I knew they didn't feel that way about each other now. For God's sake, she was 6, but they were going to be. It was in their future, and this was something that couldn't change. Her destiny was set. She was going to be with us. Falling in love wasn't a decision. It was just fate. I hugged Jasper, squealing excitedly. If I can't wait to shop with Bella after this adoption issue is settled, then it was impossible to be patient for Bella to become a teenager and watch Edward and Bella fall in love with each other. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the true miracle. Bella's POV. Edward didn't let me walk because he didn't want me to hurt my injured ankle. He carried me to the kitchen and sat me down on a chair at the kitchen aisle. It was a very tall chair, but Edward made sure I wouldn't fall before walking towards the fridge. I told him that I wanted more of Esme's pasta for breakfast, and he'd made me promise to drink a glass of apple juice for energy first. I'd agreed. I watched Edward move around the house, pouring a glass of apple juice for me. He handed me the plastic mug Alice had gotten for me, the word princess scrawled in glittering purple print on the blue surface. I sipped the apple juice and waited for Edward to reheat some of the leftover pasta for my breakfast. Carlisle had gone to his study to put away his medical kit. It was just Edward and I in the kitchen. I frowned, thinking. I loved the entire Cullen family. They were incredibly nice to me, and I felt wonderful when I was with them. I missed Mommy and Daddy. A lot. But the Cullens made me feel like I had a home with them, like it was okay for me to be happy here. They made me feel like a family. Carlisle and Esme were like my dad and mom. They reminded me of them a lot. Esme read me stories just like my mom did. Emmett and Jasper were like brothers I never had. They always made me laugh with their jokes. Emmett was especially funny,
even when he didn't try to be.
Sometimes I don't understand his jokes, though, but he was always saying things in a funny voice or making funny faces, so I laughed anyway. And I always felt happy around Jasper. Alice was like my friend. She gets excited about everything. It was so fun to watch her and play with her. She kept talking about shopping, though I hoped she wouldn't drag me to the mall. I always hated it whenever my mom brought me to the mall. Shopping was boring to me. More often than not, I fell asleep while my mom shopped. Rosalie was somewhere in between an overprotective older sister and a mom. I think she and Esme would make great mommies. She's always so kind, and she helped to kick Alice out when she wanted to play dress up with me when I was too tired. She also always brushed my hair before bed and kissed my forehead before I went to sleep. But Edward didn't feel like a brother or a parent. He felt like my best friend. I couldn't explain it. My feelings for the Cullens were very strong. I felt like I've known them for years instead of days. I loved them all very much. But Edward was different. I kept feeling like he understood me and how I felt. He was very protective of me, and even when he kept his distance, I knew he would do anything I asked him to. Yes, he was my best friend in the whole world. Edward sat next to me and smiled. I smiled back. He never lied to me or smiled phony. It was always genuine. I liked that. He placed a plate of pasta in front of me, and my smile widened. My stomach was already grumbling wildly. I grabbed the plastic fork and dug in hungrily. I wondered what I was going to do today. I didn't feel like watching more movies we'd done that all-day Friday. I wanted to go out of the house, maybe go to the park, but it was already clouding over. It could rain, and Edward wouldn't let me walk. Suddenly, Carlisle appeared in the kitchen. "Edward, Bella," he called out. We both turned to him. Edward was already frowning. "I have to go to the hospital for a quick while. Do you mind watching her for a few hours, Edward?" Edward was silent for a moment, then he shrugged.
Sure.
"It's not a problem, Carlisle. I'll call if anything comes up," he assured Carlisle. Carlisle smiled brightly at Edward, then came forward to talk to me. "Be good, will you, Bella?" he asked. He spoke it so fatherly that it made me tear up. I nodded my head and raised my arms towards him, indicating that I wanted a hug. Carlisle chuckled and obliged, hugging me for a while. He released me and kissed my hair. "I'll be back soon." I fell silent and stared at my plate. I didn't bother to pick up my fork again. I suddenly felt sick. I missed my parents. They were gone. How could I even think of replacing them, especially so suddenly? Edward poked my shoulder gently, and I looked at him. He smiled sadly at me. "What's wrong, Bella?" he whispered, his sweet breath blowing into my face. My tears started to fall, and Edward hugged me, rocking me gently. "I miss my parents," I mumbled once I calmed down enough to speak without sobbing between words. "I feel guilty," I admitted. Edward pulled back slightly to look at me, surprised. "Why, Bella?" I shrugged. "I feel bad for feeling happy when I'm here. But they're gone. I shouldn't be happy." Edward shook his head and smoothed back my hair. "No, Bella," he said firmly. "You should be happy. You deserve it. Your parents are in heaven, remember? They're happy there, too. And I'll tell you what," he leaned forward, as if he was about to tell me a secret. Unwittingly, I leaned forward to hear it. "They're watching over you," he whispered conspiratorially. "And they wouldn't be very happy if you were sad all the time. But it wouldn't be right for me to be happy either, was it?" As if he could tell, Edward continued talking. "It's okay to be sad. They were your parents. But be happy that you're okay and that they're in heaven now. Be happy that you have a whole new family to be with." I sniffed, nodding my head. Then I smiled at him. "Does this mean I get to stay?" Edward stared at me for a long moment before he matched the grin on my face. "Yes, Bella. It means you get to stay." I considered this. It would be amazing if I got to stay. I already feel at home with the Cullens. It would be very hard to leave. I glanced into Edward's topaz eyes shyly. "Does this mean you want me to stay?" Edward smiled and kissed my forehead. "Of course, Bella," he said quietly. He pulled back to look at me seriously. "I want you to stay," he said firmly, nodding his head. I resumed eating my pasta happily and finished it faster than I've ever eaten anything. I turned to face Edward again. "Can we go out?" I asked. "Please?" Edward shook his head. "I don't think that's a good idea, Bella," he said disapprovingly. You just hurt your ankle. I pouted at him. Please? I tried again. I don't want to watch movies today. Please? I could already see him ready to give in. Finally, he sighed in defeat and I grinned, cheering silently. Fine, he grumbled. Where do you want to go? I stopped. Where did I want to go? I didn't actually have a specific place in mind. I just wanted to get out of the house for a little while, get some fresh air. I shrugged sheepishly. I don't know, I admitted. Edward thought for a moment, then he smiled. Come on, little Bella, he said, standing up and lifting me into his arms effortlessly. I locked my arms around his neck. I think I know where we could go. Edward's POV. I had to move slower than usual because Bella was still unaware of my nature. I carried her out to the Volvo, again amazed that she had gotten me to do what she wanted without much effort at all. I was going to bring her to my meadow. It was a place I always went to whenever I needed to escape. Living with my family, that happened quite often. We'd been to our house in Olympia quite often. This meadow had been a part of my existence for the past 50 years. Whenever we came here, I always found myself being drawn to the meadow. I drove under the speed limit as well. I didn't want to scare Bella or injure her. Not that I believed I would lose control of the car. Of course,
I just didn't want to chance anything.
When we finally reached the path, I pulled over. I turned around to look at Bella. She had to sit in the back because she was still a child. Bella looked around curiously. Where are we? She asked, tilting her head to one side, looking at me inquisitively. I shook my head. I just brought her to the middle of nowhere, and instead of being scared, she was curious. My God. I have a special place, I told her. It's very nice there. Very calming. But we're going to have to walk a little. Is that okay? Bella frowned and looked down at her lap. Was her sense of danger finally kicking in? I felt a strange sense of depression seeping in, instead of the hope I thought I would feel. What's wrong? 3 times today, I'd asked her that. I had never been so concerned about a human's welfare before. I'd never been this concerned about anyone's welfare before. I won't be able to walk and not fall in there, she told me sadly, pointing at the trees. I chuckled, relief spreading through me irrationally. Silly Bella, I said, smiling. I'm going to carry you. With that, I climbed out of the car and rushed as fast as humanly possible to Bella's side. I opened her door and unbuckled her seatbelt. I lifted her into my arms, carefully maneuvering her out of the car so her head and swollen ankle wouldn't hit the side of the car. I slammed the door shut and shifted her into a more comfortable position in my arms. Even though I was walking just slightly faster than an average human, Bella didn't seem to question or mind it. In fact, she closed her eyes and smiled as the light breeze brushed against her skin. It took a long time to reach the meadow. When we finally reached, Bella's head was nestled against the crook of my neck, and her light breathing told me she had fallen asleep. I smiled and gently woke her up. Bella, we're here. She stirred and straightened up in my arms, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Bella yawned a little and looked around. Her beautiful chocolate eyes widened and she gasped. It's so pretty, she breathed. I laughed and nodded my head. Yes, I suppose it was. I walked over to the middle of the rounded meadow and sat down on the grass, setting Bella down next to me. I made sure to be careful of her ankle. She was still looking around the place in awe. So you like it then? I teased. Bella grinned at me. I love it, she corrected. Thank you for letting me go out today. I smiled. Really, this girl was too adorable. I laid back on the grass, and a moment later, Bella followed me. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to relax. There was just enough clouds to block the sun, so my skin wasn't glittering. But Alice had told me it wouldn't rain until Wednesday, so we were safe. I was just happy Bella was happy. I knew being cooped up in a house for nearly 3 days couldn't be fun for a 6-year-old. It wasn't even fun for me. Bella was certainly enjoyable company, but she needed fresh air, too. I never brought anyone to my meadow before. It was my place of escape. But Bella could come. I didn't know why exactly I felt comfortable sharing this private piece of my life with this human girl, but she just seemed trustworthy to me. I sighed as I thought of our connection. In the few days I've known her, I seem to have forged a certain kind of connection with Bella. I didn't know what it was, but it was odd enough. Now that Bella would be living with us, I suppose I'd have the time to figure it out. I never blamed Carlisle for turning me. My life was over when he changed me. I was grateful for it. I had an entire family now. They were a little insane sometimes, to put it mildly, but I loved them all nonetheless. Life could be a miserably endless string of days sometimes, though. I knew the others wouldn't necessarily agree with me. They had their significant others. They were fine. I didn't need love. I was fine on my own. I had no interest in finding a mate, and I knew that concerned Esme to no end. She thought my misery would be diminished if I were to find that one special mate. But I had love. I had my family. That was enough. Misery didn't come from being lonely. It came from having to repeat the same charade over and over again. It came from pretending to be something I wasn't. It came from having to hear inane human thoughts every time we were around them. In a way, being secluded in Olympia was a good thing. But Bella was different than other humans. Correction, she was just different, period. I couldn't read her mind. I get pure silence when I'm around her. While that scared me, worried me, I was blissful. I was in peace, left to my own thoughts when it was just Bella and I. It wasn't just peace I felt. I felt love. I felt loved. Her innocence, her childlike manner, her warmth, they made me feel like I've never felt before. Beyond the familiar feeling of family, it was friendship and trust and loyalty. I sighed again, too soft for her human ears. This connection I felt with her, I didn't understand it. I don't think she felt it because not only was she human, she was 6 years old. A mere child. But it was strong. I could feel it. And undoubtedly, it would only intensify as she grew older. What it meant, I had no clue. But one thing was very clear. This human child had captured my heart, just like she had captured the affections of all the others. I knew she could have asked me to give my life to her, and I would gladly do so. In just 3 days, Bella had managed to become the uninvited focal point of my existence. Rosalie's POV. I heard Alice's squeal from the other side of the forest. Normally, I would let it go. Leave it to Alice to squeal in the middle of a hunt. But Bella was a factor now. She could have gotten a vision of Bella. What was it? Was it good or bad? Was that a happy squeal or a panic squeal? Did Bella learn something new? Was she looking adorable doing something? What was it? Not knowing made my chest ached, and I tugged at Emmett's hand. He had just finished his second bear. I wanted to get to Alice. He nodded and followed me. When we reached Alice, she was jumping around, hugging Jasper at the same time. She wasn't done squealing yet. Jasper looked as bewildered as Emmett and I. Alice, I interrupted. She didn't stop. I glanced at Jasper, annoyed. He chuckled, then placed a hand on Alice's shoulder. I knew he was calming her down because the effects were obvious. She was still grinning like a maniac, though. I just had a vision, she announced proudly. So what? Alice has visions all the time. Of Bella falling? Jasper said, puzzled. Alarm kicked into my senses. Bella fell? I shouted. Alice. Jasper and Emmett all jumped. Then Alice waved it aside. Don't worry. Edward and Carlisle took care of it, she said. I was still worried, so she added, Really? She told me herself she was fine when I called. I nodded and forced myself to relax. Jasper helped. Anyway, I just had another vision, and this one is the best vision I've ever had. Alice started squealing again. When she calmed down again, she regaled her vision. Every detail spilled out without a beat. I listened with rapt attention. Edward would fall in love with Bella? Well, that was a little strange. Still, she would be 17 by then, so it wouldn't be all that odd anymore. I glanced around me. Jasper and Emmett were grinning almost as widely as Alice. They believed it was a good thing. On one hand, I was happy for Edward. He'd spent a long time being alone and miserable. It wasn't just Esme who believed it was his lack of a mate that caused him to be the real-life Grinch the whole year round. But on the other hand, I was jealous. Bella was supposed to be mine. My second chance. My daughter. My new start. And suddenly, it was fated that he would fall in love with her. I felt cheated of my time with Bella. "You've got more than 10 years, Rose," Jasper said suddenly. I glanced at him guiltily. I didn't want to be caught being self-centered about this. Besides, the way you treat her. He shook his head. "She loves you. Edward won't replace that. He's got a different kind of her love." I grinned at that. It was true, what he was saying. Besides, if I were to be angry about this, I was being selfish. After all, wasn't Bella going to fall in love with Edward, too? This was for her. This was about her. Not me. "Are you going to tell him?" asked Alice, curious. I couldn't help but wonder what Edward would say once he finds out. "Tell who what?" Esme asked, appearing behind us. All of us but Alice jumped. We'd been so involved with what Alice was saying we hadn't paid attention to Esme approaching. Alice grinned, happy that she would get another opportunity to tell the story of her visions. When she was done, Esme was smiling proudly. She looked as if she could cry if she could. "This is very good news, Alice," Esme said, pulling Alice in for a hug. "So, should we tell him?" I repeated my earlier question. Alice considered, then shook her head. "Not for now. I don't know how long we could keep it a secret, but I think we need to get him a little less on edge about Bella staying first, then we'll tell him," she said determinedly. I sighed. Keeping a secret from Edward? Nearly impossible. Of course, Emmett viewed this as a challenge. Being Emmett, he didn't back down. "Bring it on," he cackled, rubbing his hands together. I rolled my eyes. 7. Edward and Bella's Day. Edward's POV. We stayed silent for a while in the meadow. I was just laying back, my eyes closed, enjoying the serenity that this place brought me. Strangely enough, it felt even more refreshing with Bella next to me. Her presence lifted a certain suffocating feeling in the atmosphere I never even realized was there. I told myself it was because of her scent freesia, innocence, beauty, and grace, mixed in together. But even I couldn't deny the connection I felt between us, growing stronger by the day. I didn't particularly understand it. I'd never actually thought of having children before, so being around Bella, having her in my life, it felt nothing like fatherly love. But it didn't feel like brotherly love, either. If it wasn't one or the other, then what was it? I could grow frustrated just thinking about it. Maybe Bella was right about needing to get out of the house. "Edward?" I heard her whisper, her warm, soothing breath caressing my neck. I opened my eyes and looked to my right, where she was lying down next to me on the grass. Her brown eyes were wide as she waited for my response. I smiled at her, encouraging her to continue. "What's your favorite color?" My grin grew wider. My favorite color? I'd never been asked that question before. Of course, I'd never actually spent time with a 6-year-old girl before, either. I turned at human speed so that I was lying on my side, facing her. I propped myself up on one arm, resting my weight on my elbow and cradling my head in my palm. I scrunched up my face in mock concentration, amusing Bella. Brown? For the color of her eyes. Pink? For the color of her blushing cheeks. Mahogany? For the color of her hair. Cream? For the color of her skin. But I couldn't say any of that. Emmett would crucify me if he knew I'd even thought of pink. So I said, blue. It was true, I liked blue. Especially in Bella's room. My God. Since when did my entire existence revolved around this one human girl? Her eyes lit up, and she smiled excitedly. My room is blue, she announced. I nodded my head and smiled. So much for hoping that Bella wouldn't make the connection. I fought the urge to sigh. It wouldn't surprise me if Bella would be the one who uncovered what we were instead of us telling her. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. I hoped she could retain her innocence for as long as possible. Though, I didn't want her immersed in a world of vampires and demons and monsters. I wanted her immersed in a world of fairy tales and hopes and dreams and happy endings. It might not be realistic, but she was just a child. She shouldn't worry about monsters lurking in the shadows. She should be happy and content and innocent. I'd hate to take that away from her. Edward? Bella whispered again. I blinked out of my haze and gazed at her. She was biting down on her bottom lip, and she looked concerned. Before I had a chance to ask, Bella reached out to trace my eyes with her small fingers. Her wrist was not even an inch away from my nose. I could smell her freesia scent more potently now. I stopped breathing. You looked so sad, she murmured. Why are you sad, Edward? Her brown orbs held me captivated, and I thought of an answer for her. Slowly, very slowly, I took a timid breath. Her scent enveloped me, taking over my senses. I stopped breathing again immediately, but I'd already taken in a strong dose of freesia. I closed my eyes, so she wouldn't see the coal-black fire I knew was now blazing in my eyes. I felt myself calm down, and when I opened my eyes, Bella was still staring at me curiously. Her small hand had dropped back to the grass, though, for which I'm incredibly thankful for. I felt horrible. Only a monster like me could claim to feel a connection with an angel like Bella and would still feel the overpowering urge to taste her blood the next second. I'm not sad, Bella, I said quietly. She narrowed her eyes at me, her gaze unwavering.
She didn't believe me.
I sighed inwardly. How could a 6-year-old be so intuitive? Bella rolled on her back and laid down in a supine position. I felt the gentle breeze on my skin and smiled. Next to me, though, Bella shivered ever so slightly. I glanced down at her worriedly. I could already see the goosebumps on her skin.
You're cold, I remarked.
Bella looked up at me, her brown orbs defiant. Nah, she exclaimed, her bottom lip jutting out stubbornly. I chuckled. Come on, Bella. Let's go home, okay? She turned her head away from me, still stubborn, and stared at the surrounding flora. No, I sighed. Honestly, was this some sort of phase every child goes through? If it was, I hoped she would get over it soon enough. I wouldn't want to be strict with her. I had the distinct impression that Rosalie would be the strict mother when it came down to it. I just wanted to be the best friend, the good guy she could always run to or talk to. Whenever she needed me, I wanted to be there for her. Bella, you're being obstinate, I said gently. I really needed to get her out of the cold. The gentle breeze had picked up into a stronger wind. She was cold enough I didn't want her to get sick. At this, Bella turned to look at me. She shot me a quizzical look. What's obenide? She garbled out the word. My shoulders shook at my vain attempt not to laugh at her mispronunciation. Remember, Edward, you're talking to a child. My brain reminded me. I opened my eyes to find Bella scowling at me, glaring at me under the thick lashes. It means you're being stubborn, I explained. This only served to make her angrier, and she turned away from me, laying on her side, her back facing me. I sighed and reached out to poke her arm gently. I didn't want to touch her bare skin for too long. My cold hand would only make it worse. When she didn't turn around or acknowledge the fact that I was right next to her, I tried a different tack. "Please, Bella," I pleaded softly. "I only want to make sure you don't get sick. How will you play with Emmett, Jazz, and I tomorrow if you get sick?" I heard her heartbeat speed up at the mention of playing with the three of us. I laughed quietly to myself and continued,
"Come on, Bella."
"Please? It's cold for me, too." I lied. "Could we go home? I promise we could watch Peter Pan later." Bella turned around to look at me, her eyes glittering. Peter Pan was her favorite story of all time. She didn't particularly like the other fairy tales where the damsel in distress had to be saved. Peter Pan was a story of adventure, in her opinion. She loved it when Esme read the story to her before bedtime. Emmett, being Emmett, always played out the characters for her while Esme read. She fell asleep due to exhaustion from laughing too much more than anything. "Really?" she asked excitedly. I nodded my head and made a cross over my dead heart. "Cross my heart," I said solemnly. Bella laughed and nodded her head. We both stood up, and I took Bella in my arms again. She tucked her head in the crook of my neck, and soon we were off. I was glad I was able to do this without her realizing what I was. A monster. I felt sadness when I thought of the day when Bella found out. Would she still want me as her friend? As her family? Would she want to stay with us? The obvious answer came at my full force.
No.
Of course not. She'd scream and hide and beg for us to let her leave. I sighed. Maybe we should tell her before the adoption. It would be too late by then. She would be an official Cullen. But if we told her and she wanted to leave, would she tell on us? I believed she wouldn't. I trusted her. And Emmett would argue that even if she did tell, who would believe the story of a 6-year-old girl? But it hurt to think that Bella would be away from us, from me, that she would find another home and forget about us. That would be for the best, I think, but it would hurt too much. Could I let her go? Would I allow it? Or would I skulk around the corners watching out for her? I would do that to keep her safe. Who knew what was out there? Someone could hurt her. My grip around her tightened, though not enough to even hurt her fragile body. No one would hurt my Bella.
She was safe with me.
Safest with us. I wouldn't let her go. When we got home, Bella was asleep again. I didn't want to wake her up, so I parked in the garage and carried her inside to her room. I laid her down on her bed and started to move away. "Edward," she mumbled. I smiled and turned around. Had she awakened already? I looked down on her angelic face and frowned. No, her eyes were still closed. Her breathing was still even. Her heartbeat was steady. Then why did she call out my name? "Alice, no dress up." Bella squirmed in her sleep. A grin broke out on my lips. Bella sleep-talked. This was going to be very interesting. I sat down on the floor next to her head and waited for her to say more. "I want a kitty."
A kitten?
Well, I wasn't so sure about that. It wasn't as if any of us would be pouncing on the thing at any given opportunity, of course. We do have our restraint, and a small kitten wouldn't actually sustain us for any period of time. Besides, if we could handle Bella, we could handle a cat. And Jasper has been amazing so far. I wondered if Rosalie would object to this. A cat would include fur balls and other disgusting things that would only come out of an animal. And Esme probably won't be too happy about her furniture getting scratched on. Pretty flowers. Pretty flowers? Was she talking of the meadow? Not cold. Yes, she was. I smiled to myself. She was being stubborn even in her sleep. And if she was stubborn now, I'd hate to think of how stubborn she would get when she grew up. I was glad, though, that I had the opportunity to share my meadow with her. Bella seemed to enjoy the serenity of it as much as I did. I couldn't tell for sure, of course. Her mind is as quiet to me now as it was the first time I laid eyes on her. I suppose I should be a little more concerned about this than I was, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, really. What was the harm in my not being able to read Bella's mind other than the fact that it drove me crazy not to know what she was thinking all the time? If it had been a threat, laughable as it was to think of Bella being a threat, then Carlyle would have been more alarmed. All I heard in his thoughts, though, were interest and surprise. Mom? My head snapped back to Bella's sleeping form. Her face was contorted, she looked pained. I could only guess that her dreams had taken a turn for the worse. "Mommy, Daddy, wait," she whimpered. Her legs thrashed under the covers, her small hands curling into fists, grasping at the covers. I inched closer to the bed on my knees and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Bella, wake up," I whispered. I couldn't bear for her to be in this pain. I knew it hurt for her to lose her parents.
She was so young.
Her mind and body were so little, and yet she'd been hit with the worst possible trauma. How she didn't curl up in a corner, sobbing nonstop, was beyond me. She was still whimpering. "Bella, wake up," I said louder, shaking her again. Bella's eyes flew open, and she looked around wildly. Her gaze swept past me for a moment. Then her tired eyes fell on me, and she started to sob. "I had a nightmare," she mumbled as I pulled closer to me. My heart broke listening to her cracked voice, to her uncontrollable sobs. "I know," I whispered, rubbing her back soothingly. When she calmed down, I pulled back and smiled. I reached up and wiped away the remaining tears on her cheeks. "What do you say to lunch?" I asked her with a smile. Bella shrugged, still downtrodden. I placed a finger under her chin and gently tugged until her eyes met mine. Her eyes and nose were pink from crying. "It'll be okay, Bella," I said reassuringly. "I promise it'll get better." She looked at me incredulously. All right, I had to give her that. She was actually more mature than her own age sometimes. "Don't you trust me?" I gave her a mock pout. She started to laugh. "I suppose I do look ridiculous. But for Bella, I do it all again." "I trust you," Bella said seriously, before bursting into laughter again at my expression. I smiled at her. "Well, then, trust me when I say it's going to get better." Bella's POV. I went to wash my face while Edward went to make me lunch. I told him not to, we could just order pizza. Daddy did that once when Mommy had to go to Phoenix to visit her sick best friend. But he told me not to tell Mommy. Edward said that Rose and Esme would kill him if he ordered pizza instead of cook something healthy for me. I hoped that didn't include broccoli. I went down the stairs even slower and more carefully than usual. I'd already fallen over once today, but knowing me, I'd probably fall over again. Thankfully, I made it to the bottom without tripping once. I did stumble a little when I got to the living room, but Edward was already there to steady me. "I made you a turkey sandwich," he told me, chuckling at my clumsiness. I folded my arms across my chest and scowled the whole time Edward was carrying me to the dining room. He sat me down on the seat with the plate of sandwich in front of it, but I was too little. My nose reached the table, and I had to stretch to reach the sandwich. Edward was laughing as he observed this, but I didn't find it funny. I found it embarrassing. To my horror, tears started to well in my eyes. I always cried when I was angry. This time was no different. I blinked furiously, hoping that Edward wouldn't see, but he had, of course. Immediately, he lifted me out of the chair and sat down himself, settling me on his lap. "Much better." "Bella, I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to make you cry." I shook my head and reached for the plastic mug in front of me. He'd given me plain water, something Rosalie had made him give me during meals after learning that I'd conned him into giving me chocolate milk with every meal. I didn't want to talk now. My irrational, angry tears would only spill if I opened my mouth. But the lump in my throat was too big for me to swallow turkey sandwich either, so I sipped the water carefully, waiting for the tears to subside. When they did, I flashed Edward a timid smile. His answering smile was a dazzling, crooked grin. I flushed a little and turned around on his lap to eat the sandwich. He was a surprisingly good cook. I thought only mommies cook. My daddy was terrible at it, and he liked to eat fish. A lot. I didn't understand that. But Edward wasn't my daddy. He was my best friend, I think.
I wasn't sure about that.
I thought he was, but he was older. I don't know if he thought I was his best friend, too. I shot him a look, and his smile widened. "What are you thinking about, Bella?" he asked. I shrugged and continued to chew on my sandwich. I didn't want him to know. If he didn't think I was his best friend, then I would be very sad. I didn't want to think of that. I finished my sandwich faster than I would have liked. I'd already downed a whole glass of water. "Won't you tell me what you were thinking of?" I rolled my eyes. Edward had been asking me this question since I gave him that look. Did he ever give up? I was just about to scream with frustration. "Will you get me a glass of chocolate milk?" I asked him hopefully. He gave me a reprimanding look. I knew it was because of Rosalie. She was scary when she was mad. I still wanted chocolate milk, though. My sandwich was already finished. Lunch was over. I just wanted one glass. Besides, maybe Edward would forget his question if I distracted him. So I batted my lashes at him and gave him a wide smile. I knew this would get me anything. I tried it on him yesterday when I wanted to watch Snow White the second time in a row. It worked like a charm. "Please?" "Only after you answer my question first." He grinned evilly. I scowled and turned away from him. I didn't want to see his face when I asked. "I was just wondering if you were my best friend." There was silence. I felt the tears starting to form again. Why did I cry all the time? It was hardly a good thing. In fact, it was very embarrassing, especially when I kept doing it in front of Edward. Then he spoke. "Bella," he called out. His voice was soft, gentle, velvet. "Bella, won't you look at me?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. The last time he'd asked me to do something, I ended up tearing up. I wasn't about to do it again less than a minute after. "Please?" I still refused. "If you don't look at me, then how will I tell you that you are the most amazing best friend a guy could ask for?" I whipped around to look at him, shocked. He was grinning from ear to ear, his golden eyes twinkling. "Really?" I whispered. He nodded his head, wrapping his arm around my waist to pull me closer for a hug. It was all quite awkward since I was still sitting on him. When he pulled back, I said, "Chocolate milk, please." I smirked. There was no way he could get out of this one. He still looked reluctant. He opened his mouth to argue, but I clapped my small hand over his mouth. "If you don't gimme, I'll tell Esme you lied when you promised," I threatened. Edward sighed. "You," he touched the tip of my nose with his finger lightly, "are the most dangerous little girl in the whole world. You know that?" I started to laugh. I highly doubted that. Even on my best day, I fell twice. How could a klutz like me be dangerous to anyone? And I was little too. Compared to Rosalie, I was nothing scary. And compared to Emmett, well, forget it. Edward raised an eyebrow at this and started to tickle me, which only made me laugh harder. Tears were falling from my eyes from laughing so much. "Stop," I squealed. He only stopped when I was in danger of falling off his lap from squirming too much. He readjusted me while standing up and carried me and the plate and mug to the kitchen. "You're strong," I commented. Edward laughed and grinned at me. "This is nothing. Wait till you see Emmett carry the TV all on his own," he teased. "No way." Edward set me on the kitchen aisle. It was pretty high from the ground, but I didn't have a fear of height. I waited for Edward to wash the plate and pour me a glass of chocolate milk. I drank it happily when Edward gave it to me. The phone rang all of a sudden, and I glanced at the blue cordless at the end of the kitchen aisle. I think the Cullens had a phone in every room. Edward walked over to pick it up. Yes? Child services? I looked at him. I still wasn't sure what child services meant, but I had the feeling that it wasn't a good thing. No, my father's not home. Yes, I know for a fact that he was right about wanting to adopt her. Yes. All right, I'll tell my parents when they get home. He hung up the phone, and when he turned back to look at me a moment later, he looked half tired, half excited. Who's Dad? I asked, my mouth hidden in the mug. I didn't want Edward to see me frowning. He smiled. That was the nice lady from Child Services. They called about you, he told me, walking over to me. He lifted me into his arms and carried me, chocolate milk and mug and all, to the living room. He sat me down on the couch and took his rightful place next to me. For some reason, I started to panic. About me? I asked, my eyes widening. Are they gone? Take me away? Suddenly, chocolate didn't taste so appetizing anymore. I pushed the mug into Edward's hands, too short to actually reach the coffee table. He did it for me. No, Bella, he said quickly. They just wanted to know if we wanted you to stay, he explained. I looked up into his topaz eyes, trying to see what the answer to that would be. Edward simply smiled and brushed the hair away from my face. You're my best friend, he said. You're Emmett's and Jasper's spy whenever they want to know what Rose and Alice are saying. You play dress up with Alice, no matter how much you hate it. You're Rose's and Esme's daughter, and you make Carlisle very happy, like a dad. I stared at him speechless. Was that really how everybody felt about me? Truth be told, I wasn't a very good spy. Rose and Alice caught me listening at Alice's bedroom door. And I always complained when Alice suggested playing dress up. I don't think I made anyone happy at all. They were the ones who made me very happy. Really? He nodded his head, then bent to kiss my hair lightly. So of course we want you to stay, Bella. I smiled, contented. If this was the way that it was, then I was glad. I would be staying with my best friend and his family. I guess they were my family now, too. I frowned. That was confusing. Emmett's POV. I'd finished off my last bear of this hunting trip. The sun was about to rise, and we were about to go home. About damn time. I missed the little squirt. I wondered what she and Edward had been up to. Alice had a vision that Carlisle had to go to the hospital yesterday, and he hadn't been able to get home until Bella's dinner time. I laughed to myself. I hoped Edward hadn't bored her. It wouldn't do good for their future relationship. As if reading my mind, Alice popped up next to me in the clearing and glared at me. Don't even think of the vision I told you, Emmett, she snapped. I shrugged, looking at her guiltily. Well, how do you suggest I keep this from him? You do know that he's a mind reader, I reminded her. Alice rolled her eyes. By this time, Esme, Jasper, and Rosalie had approached us as well. I wrapped an arm around Rose, and she grinned at me. Just think of other things like sex or Chinese burials or war or TV shows, she suggested. I scoffed. And how long exactly are you planning on this? Edward would know we're keeping something from him. He'd be too preoccupied with Bella, Alice said confidently. Well, no use betting against Alice. She sighed and moved closer to Jasper. Listen, it'll be hard, but we can do it. Just remember to keep your thoughts away from the future. We don't want Edward to get all Edward, she said, for a lack of a better word, and run off in the opposite direction. It's probably not going to last very long, but try. She glared at me as she emphasized the last word. I glanced around defensively to find that everyone else was also looking at me. Hey, I exclaimed. Why are all of you looking at me? Esme laughed and patted my arm in her motherly way. Because, dear, she chuckled. You're the most likely one to slip up. I scowled the rest of the journey home. 8. Revelations and Philippinis. Edward's POV. Alice, Jasper, Rosalie, Emmett, and Esme came back a few minutes before dawn. They'd hunted more enough to satisfy themselves for 2 weeks. Hey, Edward, how's Bella doing? I stopped playing my piano and turned to face them. They were already sitting on the couch. I heard Carlisle coming out of his study to join us, so I went to sit on the armchair. Good, I replied Alice's unspoken question. No one questioned this anymore. I'd been having silent conversations with them all for years. But for some strange reason, all 5 of them were acting strangely. I couldn't quite understand it. They were fidgeting in their seats and looking anywhere but at me. I couldn't sense anything wrong with their thoughts, though. Alice was thinking of the shopping spree she'd have to bring Bella on. Poor girl. Emmett was thinking of Rose in certain ways. I winced, trying to block out his thoughts as much as I could. It was unnerving, even after all these years, to hear his thoughts go in that direction. This was my brother and sister we were talking about. I'd never get used to it. Jasper was debating with himself on a new book he'd gotten about the Civil War. He'd thought most of the details were inaccurate. Well, if anyone were to know, Jasper would. Rosalie was thinking whether she should get a new hairstyle. I rolled my eyes and moved on to Esme, who was just wondering if Bella had had enough to eat. It's fine, Esme, I reassured her. I didn't forget to feed her. Esme clicked her tongue, thinking, but she's human, Edward. She's going to need a lot more food, constantly. I nodded my head. I'd done that. I gave her 3 solid meals, and whenever she was hungry for a snack, I fixed her a sandwich or gave her some juice. She was fine, but something wasn't completely right. They still looked guilty or awkward, as if they had something to hide. I narrowed my eyes. What could they be hiding? I felt a sense of calm and contentment and shot Jasper a dark look. He'd sensed my suspicion and confused me enough with a feeling of joy. Jasper smiled back at me innocently. I scowled. Just then, Carlisle came into the living room. He, too, sensed something strange about the others. Edward, do you know what's going on? I shook my head almost imperceptibly. Carlisle took the hint and sat next to Esme. She smiled and kissed him tenderly. I smiled at that. Leave it to Carlisle and Esme to show us how loving 2 parents could be towards each other and towards their children. Right? Well, we have certain things to discuss, Carlisle said, looking at all of us. I had talked to Carlisle about telling Bella about us. It was something she certainly needed to know. Yes, Alice said, without giving Carlisle a chance to say what was on his mind. Alice, Carlisle said reprovingly. Alice settled back in her seat and took Jasper's hand, but she was still grinning. I knew she already saw Carlisle bringing up the subject, and she was excited for Bella to know. Sorry, she said to Carlisle. He continued, Bella would be joining our family soon. Being what we are, it's important for her to know. Edward has proposed that we tell her before the representative shows up later on this morning. I'd like to know your opinions on this matter. The room was silent for a moment. This was a very vital decision. No one had ever just revealed our secret to a human being. It wasn't just revealing our secret, but revealing our world. Bella would know there are others like us. I think we should. Esme was the first to break the silence. She has the right to know who we really are, she explained herself. But it would scare her. And what if the adoption agency and child services refuse us the right to adopt Bella? What then? A human girl who happens to know about us out there? Rosalie was thinking. I hissed at her. What? Don't you trust Bella with our secrets? I snapped at her. I expected Emmett to jump to Rosalie's defense and was mildly surprised when he didn't. Of course, Rose didn't need to be defended. She could easily be the most vicious one among us when she was angry. What surprised me more was when Rosalie merely looked amused at my reaction.
Alice was right.
Alice was right about what? Asked, my eyes narrowing once more. Rosalie backtracked, and Alice shot her a worried glance before relaxing. She was blocking my thoughts, which meant that she didn't want me seeing something. Probably a vision that had caused her to stop worrying in less than a second. I just meant that Bella would be in danger if she knew, Rosalie pointed out. The Volturi dash. Will mind their own business, I interrupted. Bella's ours. It's got nothing to do with them. I think we should tell her, Jasper agreed. But then I knew he was going to side with Alice. Yeah, me too, Emmett said, grinning. Rosalie hesitated for a second. Okay, she nodded. We should. I'm only saying this because Alice said Bella was most definitely staying, and I didn't want to have to lie to her all the time. She said defensively before any of us could pull out an uncharacteristic "I told you so." The sun had already risen, and the place was lighter now. Carlyle nodded his head. Then we'll tell her after breakfast. It'll give her some time to think before the agent gets here. He sighed. I wish she could have more time to digest this. I don't want to scare her off. I concurred wholeheartedly.
But there was no time left.
In Alice's head, I suddenly caught a vision of how today would plan out. Is that why your hands are so cold? Bella asked, tracing invisible patterns on my palm while she sat on my lap. I nodded my head, waiting anxiously for her to speak. Will you hurt me? I shook my head. Never, Bella. I only want you safe. Then suddenly Bella was older. Much older. She looked to be 16 now, nearly my age by way of appearances. She was wearing a midnight blue dress with a black ribbon around the waist. Her long, mahogany hair cascaded down her shoulders. Her brown eyes were the most captivating ones I'd ever seen. They pulled me in deeper. I felt like being lost in her soul. She was glancing in front of her shyly, a coy smile playing on her lips. Hi, she said, her eyes sparkling, the most wonderful blush painting her cheeks. The sound of her voice alone was enough to send my dead heart soaring. If I were alive, I'd have been wishing for death just to hear her speak again. She looked like an angel. But who was she talking to? Who was she smiling at? I couldn't see. I think Jasper would look great in a fireman's uniform. Yes, I could just see it now. I wonder if I could persuade him to carry a hose. I stared at Alice, stunned. What on earth? But she kept thinking of Jasper in several different outfits, and I blocked her out. I didn't want to hear that at all. But her visions, I couldn't understand it. I couldn't even understand the emotions surging through me at that vision. Protective. Yes, that was it. I felt protective of Bella. If she were to grow up to become that magnificent, beautiful creature, I shook my head. She would put Rosalie to shame, and that was saying something. I winced, imagining the boys that would be after her. I would have to talk to Carlyle and Esme about that when she's older. I don't think dating would be a very good idea at all. Suddenly, I heard Bella moving about in her bed upstairs. I heard her mumble something, and the rustle of sheets. She was about to wake up. Let me wake her up. Emmett jumped off the couch. No, 6 vampires half yelled at him. He looked at us in shock. Rosalie rolled her eyes at him. You'd find some incredulous way to wake her up, and she'd get scared out of her mind. Not a good start for today, Emmett, she chided him. Emmett pouted. Please, Rose? I promise I won't do anything bad. I just missed the little squirt. She sighed. Emmett could be a real teddy bear when he wanted to be.
How could she say no to that?
So she gave in. And not 2 seconds later, she was already yelling at him for scaring Bella off. I watched Bella leave with Jasper, hand in hand. She enjoyed reading to Jasper, ever since her first day here. She'd wandered into the library, found Jasper reading his new Civil War book, and had forced him to listen to her attempts at reading The Little Prince. I couldn't believe it. She had looked me straight in the eyes, saw the truth in me, and hadn't been completely repulsed by what I was. No, she had touched my hand, my cheek, had cried when she thought she'd upset me. I really had to stop making her cry. It was getting ridiculous. Did all children cry this much? Then I turned my attention back to my family. Jasper was trying hard not to laugh at Bella when she'd mispronounced the words in The Cat in the Hat. But the rest of them were thinking of something other than Bella. Anything but her. Carlisle didn't know anything. I could tell. He was concerned about the agent coming today, wondering how it would all turn out. The others were thinking of different things. Alice started singing the Star-Spangled Banner in Chinese, Arabic, and Hebrew. Rosalie started to picture Emmett doing an Egyptian dance. Oh God, Emmett. What were you thinking? Esme was thinking of how she'd get to cook human food now, and begun listing all the recipes she'd known, including listing the ingredients and methods. Emmett was thinking of how he'd beat me and Jasper in a wrestling match later on tonight. None of them were thinking of Bella, which was odd considering these past few days. She had been the only thing on their minds. And after such a big revelation and such a big challenge to come, they should be thinking of nothing but Bella. They were hiding something. I threw up my hands in the air. What are you hiding from me? I accused, looking at the four I knew weren't innocent. Carlisle looked shocked. Just tell me already. You know I'll find out. Alice smiled sweetly at me. Nothing, dear brother. Why would you think something's up? Maybe because you're singing the Star-Spangled Banner in every language possible? I shot back at her sarcastically. I gazed at them all until I found Emmett. He was practically waiting for the chance to tell me, bouncing very Alice-like in his seat. Emmett. I raised an eyebrow, trying to intimidate him into telling me. He didn't need intimidation. Excitement was enough. Well, see dash. Rosalie cut him off by jumping into his lap and kissing him long and hard. His words as well as his thoughts were cut short. I rolled my eyes and jumped off my seat. I did not need to see this. Bella's POV. I woke up to Emmett's huge grin an inch above mine. I shrieked, momentarily frightened, before I remembered. Of course, Emmett found this incredibly funny and pulled back to allow me to sit up in bed. He was chortling, his booming laughter bouncing off the walls. Emmett. I heard Rosalie shout. I told you not to scare her. Then a huge smile spread on my face. They were back. They were all back. As much as I loved spending time with Edward and later with Carlisle, I wanted to spend the time with the rest of them, too. I missed them. Emmy. I squealed, throwing up my arms so he knew I wanted him to pick me up. He chuckled and lifted me into his arms. Hey, sweet angel. He greeted me, planting a wet and sloppy kiss on my cheek. I giggled and wiped off his slobber. Did Edward bore you? Me? Edward asked, leaning against the door frame, a hand over his heart, looking hurt. I shook my head furiously. No, I protested. We went. I didn't exactly know where we went, but it was really pretty there. Out, I finished lamely. Edward and Emmett both chuckled at this. Come on, go brush your teeth. Esme is making chocolate chip pancakes, Edward told me. I brightened up and squirmed in Emmett's arms, wanting to get down. He obliged, and I ran stumbling a few times to the bathroom. I brushed my teeth as quickly as possible and splashed my face with water. I glanced at the tub behind me in the mirror longingly. I wasn't allowed to go into the tub alone. Rose or Alice or Esme had to be there. But I really wanted to take a bath. Rosalie had gotten me strawberry bubble bath. I loved it. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and I jumped. It's me, kid. Alice's musical voice floated through the door. I've got your clothes for today with me. Do you want to take a bath now or after breakfast? I started jumping.
Now.
I ran to the door and unlocked it, letting Alice in. She laughed, a sound that reminded me of chiming bells, and closed the door behind her. "All right, get ready, Angel." She smiled down at me. "I'll run the bath." I nodded my head and waited patiently for Alice to turn on the tap and fill the bath with water and bath salt. The smell of strawberries was already filling up the room. "Okay, Angel, in you go." She tilted her head in the direction of the bath. I wriggled out of my nightgown and held my arms out to Alice. She gently placed me in the bathtub. Rosalie said I shouldn't go in alone in case I slipped and fell and hurt myself, or if an accident happened. It would probably happen if I did it on my own. I was very clumsy, but Alice would keep me safe, I know it. I splashed around in the water, and Alice played with me, dropping my bath toys in the water: a ship, a duck, a frog. She'd gotten all these for me my first day here. When I woke up in the morning, Alice and Rosalie had taken me into the bathroom for a bath, and everything was already there. When I'd even finished cleaning behind the ears, Alice wrapped me in a towel and carried me out of the tub. We dried off, and I slipped into a pair of jeans with a flower on one leg and a red t-shirt. She carried me back to my room and sat me down in front of the vanity. "Try not to get too much dirt on it later when you play with the boys, okay?" Alice smiled at me as she did my hair. I would have just wanted it to be untouched. Why bother? Like Alice said, I was going to play with the boys. Esme would want it to be outside because the last time we played, Emmett threw a football and it ended up breaking a vase. Esme was mad at him. Alice pinned up my hair on both sides and let the rest cascade down my back. She scrutinized me for a moment, finger on her chin, arms crossed. She looked like she was trying to make a big decision. I tried not to roll my eyes. Obviously, Alice treated looks as a very important thing. I hoped she wouldn't be like this forever. "Okay, you're all set," she said finally, and I hopped off the chair. "Come on, Alice. Esme's making chocolate chip pancakes." I tugged at her hand, trying to get her to go faster. Curse Edward for telling her that, she mumbled under her breath. I stopped moving altogether and stared at her. "It's not nice to curse," I informed her. Alice looked stunned for a moment, then she laughed. Shaking her head, she kissed my forehead. "Of course it isn't. I'm sorry, Bella, Angel. Will you forgive me?" I shrugged.
Okay.
"But you should really say sorry to Edward." We made it down the stairs just as Esme was putting the pancakes on the dining table. I walked over to Edward and tugged at his sleeve. He looked down at me and smiled. He pulled out the earpiece he was using and put his iPod away. "Do you want to sit with me?" he asked. I smiled widely and nodded my head, raising my arms over my head. He took the hint and lifted me off the ground. I settled on his lap and reached for the pancakes. I wanted to ask for chocolate milk, but Rosalie made me drink plain white milk instead. She said it would help my bones grow strong. I don't see how chocolate milk would be any different. Then Carlyle cleared his throat. "Bella, someone's coming today," he begun. I stiffened, and Edward must have felt it because he rubbed his hands up and down my arms soothingly. I relaxed a little. Only a little. "She just wants to talk to you and to us. She wants to see if you're doing okay here, or if you want to be with another family," he explained to me. Despite myself and his explanations and Edward's reassurances, I started to panic. What if this woman didn't think I should be with the Cullens? What if she took me away? My bottom lip quivered in that annoying way it did every time I was upset. It was always the giveaway, and everyone would know I was beginning to cry. I hated it. But I don't want to be with another family. My words weren't coming out complete now because I was starting to cry. The others looked at each other in panic, and I realized that they might not want a girl who cried at every little thing. That, of course, just made me cry harder. Edward wrapped his arms around my waist and leaned forward so that I could feel his chest against my back.
"Sure," he said.
I felt his lips at my ear, blowing coolly. I couldn't help but giggle at the funny feeling it caused.
I told you, Bella.
We won't let anyone take you away from us, he whispered. Promise? I sniffed. He smiled at me and kissed my hair. Promise? I leaned back into his cold arms and rested my head on his shoulder, smiling.
What will I
have to say to her? I asked, worried. Carlyle shrugged. He was smiling widely for some reason, but I didn't mind. He looked very handsome when he smiled that big. Don't worry, Bella, he said gently. Just go through the morning like any other morning. Play with the boys, Dash. Just don't get too much dirt on her outfit, Alice interrupted. It looks really good on her, and I dash. Do some reading, Carlyle interrupted Alice, glaring at her a little. Alice fell back in her chair, shutting her mouth. I giggled at the sight. It was the first time I'd seen Alice stop ranting about clothes. Watch a little bit of TV, anything you want. If she asks you a question, answer as honestly as possible. Can you do that for me? I nodded my head and tilted my head to the side, scanning the room. I missed the Rosalie, Alice, Jasper, Emmett, and Esme when they were gone yesterday. I knew it was only a day, and I was being irrational, but I still missed them. Emmett caught my eye when I looked at him and waved his fingers. I blushed and waved back, burying my face in Edward's chest. I heard Emmett's booming laughter a second later. Bella's? Esme's soft voice drew me to her. I looked up to see her looking down at me tenderly. She looked so beautiful and so motherly. She didn't look anything like my mother, but she reminded me of her. Her concern, her love, the looks she always gave me. Not to mention my mother always cooked for me, just like she did. We have to tell you something, Esme said. Will that be okay? Can you keep a secret? I straightened up in Edward's grip. I can, I yelped. I could keep a secret, I knew I could. They all laughed a little at my enthusiasm, but they stopped after a while. I noticed that they all looked very serious. I bit my lip, worried. Was I in trouble? Bella, before you become a part of our family, Esme began, I want you to know something about us. But it's a big secret, and no one can ever know, okay? Otherwise, we'd all be in very big trouble. Can you promise that you will never tell anyone? She asked, leaning forward in her seat to take both my hands in hers. I begun chewing on my lip, a habit I picked up from my mother. I always did it whenever I'm upset or worried. I nodded my head. I didn't want any of them to be in any kind of trouble. If keeping their secret would help them, then I would. Besides, I was excited to know their secret and be a part of it. Do you know what vampires are? Esme asked me, her beautiful eyes probing me for an answer. I thought back. There was one time when Daddy wanted to watch Dracula. It was when Mommy was in Phoenix to visit her best friend. He'd said we should do everything Mommy wouldn't allow us to do. I was 4 years old at the time, so the movie made me scared. I couldn't sleep alone for weeks, thinking Dracula was going to show up out of nowhere and bite me. Mommy got real mad at Daddy for a long time. I nodded again.
Yes.
Like Dracula, I said brightly. Esme cracked a smile at this. I watched the movie with Daddy. It scared me. Mommy told him to sleep on the couch for a week. With good reason, I heard Rosalie said. Rose. Like you weren't thinking it. I didn't understand any of this. Thinking what? And why was Esme asking me about Dracula? Were they going to watch the movie again? If they were, I'd rather go play in my room. Maybe Edward could come with me. See, my family and I. Esme hesitated and shot Alice a look. When Alice nodded, Esme turned back to me, took a deep breath, and continued. We're vampires, too. I stared at her. This had to be a joke. Mommy told me every night that vampires weren't real. She told me that monsters weren't real, and that I was safe. So how could the Cullens be vampires when vampires don't exist? But Dracula scared me. Why didn't I feel scared around the Cullens? I felt safe with them, happy even, and it was hard to believe that Edward would kill me. Or any of them, really. You are? I asked bluntly.
I didn't know what else to say.
Esme nodded and let go of my hands. She had a worried look on her face, as if she was afraid what I might do or say next. I myself didn't know how to react. So I did the only thing that I could think of. I turned to the only person I knew who made sense to me. Edward. He was looking at me cautiously, too. I kept waiting for them to say, "Just kidding." But looking into Edward's eyes, seeing the honesty in their golden depth, I couldn't doubt it. His arms weren't touching me now. They had fallen off my waist. I grabbed one of his hands and flipped it, tracing invisible lines on the pale skin. Was this why he always felt so cold to me? I looked up at him. "Is that why your hands are so cold?" I asked him in a whisper. Edward looked pained, but he simply nodded his head.
Oh, so he was a vampire.
They all were, but I'd been staying with them for days now. If they'd wanted to hurt me, wouldn't they have done it already? And they treated me like family. I had never had this much fun before, not even with Mommy and Daddy. "Will you hurt me?" I asked him softly. His golden eyes widened, and he shook his head. "Never, Bella. I only want you safe." I looked at him in confusion. I'd seen the movie, and when I didn't understand it, Daddy had explained. Vampires needed to drink people's blood, or they'll die. "But won't you need to drink my blood?" I asked him, tilting my head to one side as I studied his features. Was being a vampire the reason he looked as if he was carved out of stone? Edward's eyes widened, and he spluttered for a few good seconds before regaining himself. "No, Bella, we're not like that. See, bad vampires drink people's blood. They have red eyes and they're very mean," he told me. "But good vampires, like us, drink animal blood. We don't hurt people. We won't hurt you." I chewed on my bottom lip.
Huh.
I never thought of that. There were good vampires and bad vampires. Well, Mommy said there were good people and bad people, so why would vampires be any different? Edward looked incredibly uncomfortable talking about this, though. I wanted nothing more than to reassure him and see him smile again. I smiled up at him and touched his cheek with a hand. "Okay." He raised an eyebrow at me and frowned. I noticed Alice, Esme, and Carlisle smiling, though. Jasper looked smug about something, and Emmett and Rosalie looked shocked. But Edward, he looked almost angry. "Okay," he choked out. I nodded my head, frowning now, too. "Bella, we just told you we're vampires," he snapped. "Aren't you upset? Afraid? Angry?" I wasn't. I wasn't feeling any of those things. I just felt happy. I had Edward with me, my best friend. I had Alice and the entire Cullen family with me. They wanted me to be a part of their family. They trusted me enough with a secret so important no one else could know. So, why was Edward so mad at me? Didn't he want me to know? Didn't he want me to stay? Did he want me to be so scared off that I would run away and never come back? Was that what he wanted? I felt the tears starting again and groaned inwardly. Why on earth did this have to happen to me? Edward looked guilty, as if regretting his sudden outburst. His cold hands cupped my cheeks, and his thumbs brushed away the tears as they fell. "I'm sorry, Bella," he whispered. He looked like he was in agony.
Why?
"I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gotten angry at you. Will you forgive me?" I refused to answer. "Why did you get mad at me?" I asked, sniffing, trying to stop my tears. He sighed. "I never expected you to be so calm. Any normal person would be scared of me." He smiled that crooked smile, and suddenly, I couldn't be upset with him anymore. I gave him a watery smile. I was pretty sure my nose was red by now from all the crying. "You're not scary at all," I teased him. Edward grinned at me and started tickling me again.
Stop.
"Stop." I laughed, squirming around. I was gasping from laughing so hard. My stomach actually hurt. Edward smiled and kissed my forehead. "Thank you for not being afraid, then," he whispered. I giggled. That was probably the strangest thing someone has ever said to me. That and we're vampires. Carlisle reached over to brush back a strand of hair that had fallen from the hair clip Alice had pinned. "So, do you still want to stay with us?" he asked me, smiling. I nodded my head, blushing. I nodded my head and Carlisle grinned, patting my hand. "Good, because we want you to stay with us, too." I couldn't help feeling exceptionally happy when he said this. "The lady from the agency be here in a few hours, so why don't you read to Jasper in the meantime?" I wriggled down from Edward's lap and ran to Jasper. He smiled and stood up, taking my hand to lead me to the library. I'd read to Jasper a few times to improve on reading and pronouncing words. I think I was getting better. At least Jasper didn't laugh at me every 5 seconds anymore. Jasper's POV. Filipinis. That's it. I couldn't take it. That was the third word she'd messed up, and we'd only started 5 minutes ago. I burst out into laughter. I felt her confusion and her frustration turn into embarrassment and anger. I clutched at my sides and tried to control my laughter. It didn't help that the entire family had heard her and were also laughing. Their emotions were making mine worsen.
"I'm sorry."
"Bella," I gasped, trying my hardest to stop chuckling. Bella closed her book and chucked it aside. I stopped laughing and looked at her as seriously as I could while still smiling. "Come now, Bella," I chided. "Just because you got some things wrong doesn't mean you can't still learn it. It takes time to get things right," I said, standing up to pick the book and walking over to her. I handed it to her, but Bella stared at it defiantly, crossing her arms across her chest. "Bella, come on," I used my most persuasive voice. "Let's try again." "No." I was baffled. I didn't know how exactly to get her to try. She had evidently had enough of my laughter at her failure. Let's all thank God it wasn't Emmett she'd read to, or she would have given up that first day itself. "Bella," I said, lifting her up into my arms and putting her down on my lap. She still refused to look at me, and her arms were still crossed. "Come on." I sighed when she didn't oblige. Maybe it was time to tell her a story. Something about my failures and how I persisted over time until I could do it. Well, the most obvious one would be to tell her about my bloodlust, but Edward had been awkward enough telling her about our diet. I don't think he'd appreciate it if I were to start talking about my struggle for control and how I'd spent years drinking human blood and killing people. I veered my thoughts away from Edward and Bella, not wanting to scare off Edward and incur the wrath of Alice. Maybe we should go back to my human memories. I never really told anyone about my human memories. Alice knew some things, but that was because she was Alice. She was my confidant. When things bother me, I tell them to her. I distinctly remember trying to ride a bicycle. It wasn't as modern as it was now, not as developed, but I wanted to try anyway. It looked really amazing to me as a kid, so I kept pestering for my dad to teach me. He gave in, but it took me weeks to learn. So I smiled down at Bella's hunched form in my arms and begun the story. "You know, when I was a child, I wanted to ride a bicycle," I told her. Bella turned slightly to give me an incredulous look, as if to say, "We're not talking about bicycles." I chuckled slightly, then breathed in deeply. Bella's scent was burning my throat, but only slightly. She was still much too young for her scent to be strong, and truth be told, I'd been around it for days at such close quarters. Everywhere I turned, I could smell her. I hoped that by the time she was older and her scent was stronger, I would be desensitized enough not to be bothered. I could already tell that her freesia scent was going to be powerful. Just listen, I tapped her nose lightly. She wrinkled it, adorable thing, and waited patiently for me to continue. I kept asking my dad to teach me, and I was so annoying he finally gave in. I went back to the story. But the thing is, no matter how hard I wanted it, I just couldn't get it right. I kept falling all the time. Bella grinned at me, turning around completely to wrap a tiny arm around my neck. She didn't reach all the way. I know what that's like, she said solemnly. I laughed. Well, I was upset. I continued dramatically, but I still wanted to learn. My dad. See, he knew how to ride a bicycle, so he laughed whenever I fell. He wanted to teach me, but he found it funny that I didn't know how. Bella frowned at this and leaned her head against my shoulder, her eyes wide as she listened to my story. But I still kept trying. And guess what? I leaned forward. What? She asked, completely engrossed in the story. Bam! I yelled. Bella screamed a little, jumping back slightly, her cheeks flushed. I laughed, and she joined me after a minute, though her heart still beat irregularly after the scare. I finally knew. I kept getting better and better until I could finally ride it on my own. I finished proudly. Bella stared at her hand on her lap for a long moment. Then she looked up at me. So, she said slowly. I waited for her to make the connection. Bella was intelligent for a 6-year-old. We had to give her some credit. You think that I should keep trying? She asked me, almost shyly. I smiled and nodded my head. Yes, I think that. She took in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Okay, I'll try again, she said bracingly. I chuckled. Maybe we ought to try an easier book though, huh? I had made Bella promise to be on my team before Emmett or Edward could get to her. We were playing football with Bella again. Not seriously, of course. We were going to let her win anyway. Bella was standing in the front yard, a little football in her hands, waiting for us to join her. We still had an hour left before the agent came, and Bella wanted to play. Edward, of course, gave in without a fight.
Poor guy.
He had himself wrapped around tiny Bella's fingers. I wondered what it would be like once she was older. Don't go there, I screamed at myself as I remembered that Edward was going to be out of the house in a few seconds. Don't bother, don't bother, don't bother. Edward came out and looked at me funny as he heard my thoughts. At least I didn't give anything away. I breathed a sigh of relief. Emmett came out to join Edward, Bella and I, and we crouched down to her eye level around her. It must look incredibly funny to a third party. Won't you be on my team, Bella? Edward asked sweetly. Bella shook her head, and he looked shocked. Why not? Bella giggled. I promised, Jasper, was her simple reply. Edward scowled at me. You cheated, he said glumly. Did not, I teased. Emmett rolled his eyes. Could we just get on with the game? He asked impatiently. He called the game to begin, and Bella was running. We could have caught her without batting an eye, but we let her move in her human speed. What made it all the more interesting was that she was much more clumsy, much slower due to her short legs, and she was tiny. She squealed at everything, and she honestly screamed when Emmett came at her. She'd managed to get dirt on her jeans and on her shirt, even in her hair, for God's sake 2 minutes into the game. I could practically taste the annoyance emanating from Alice as she sat on the porch, watching us with Rose, Esme, and Carlisle. But she was so smart. Instead of going around Emmett, she went under his legs. She kept close to me to throw me the football, so I could run faster and win. She used every trick she knew, and I didn't even teach her. Honestly, I was proud. Even though we let her win, and it was a mindless game of football 3 of the players weren't even seriously playing, I was proud. She looked so happy and so free that I wanted nothing more than to give her all that she deserved. 9 funny hats and interrogations. Alice's POV. Oh, God. I knew the dirt and the mud was coming, but this was too much. Look at that precious outfit. It's gone now.
Ugh, boys.
Must they corrupt Angel Bella? Yes. Edward shouted from the yard, and I realized that he wasn't shouting because he won, but he was answering my unspoken question. I stuck my tongue out at him, which I knew he could see all the way out there. Then I had a vision the agent would be here in 32 minutes and 43 seconds. I had to get Bella all cleaned up. She had mud in her hair, for God's sakes. Stop, I screeched. They all froze in place, and I marched over. Come on, Alice. It's just dirt, Emmett said. Only Bella looked guilty for dirtying her clothes. I bent to pick her up and cradled her against my chest. It's not that. I glared at them. Though I would love to give them a piece of my mind about this. Maybe I should get Bella jerseys for whenever the boys decide Bella should play with them. The agent will be here in half an hour. I wanted to make sure Bella looks presentable. I turned to leave, then changed my mind. I stopped to face them again. You guys should probably clean up, too. I looked at them up and down disapprovingly. All I got in return were 3 sheepish grins. Rolling my eyes, I shifted Bella in my arms and marched back into the house. Having heard my explanation to the boys, Esme and Rosalie were straightening everything in sight, while Carlisle hovered over Esme awkwardly, unsure of what to do. I climbed the stairs and went inside Bella's bathroom. I set her down on her feet and looked at her disapprovingly for a moment. As if knowing she was in trouble, her lips formed a pout and her eyes grew wide and pleading. I groaned. No wonder Edward gave in so easily. Who could resist this little angel? I knelt down to eye level and said, Now, Bella, you know what we said about someone important coming? She nodded her head, eyes lighting up now that she knew she wasn't in trouble. We have to get you all cleaned up, okay? We want you to look nice and all. I filled up the tub with water and those strawberry-scented bath salts she was so fond of. When the bath was ready, I helped Bella out of her clothes or the rags that resembled clothes a few hours before and into the tub. She wanted to play with her bath toys again, but we had limited time, so I worked to clean every nook and cranny. I made sure all the dirt was out of her hair, behind her ears, on her nose, on her chin. My God. She was going to have to spend more time with us girls instead of the boys. Finally, I wrapped a towel around her, draining the tub, and carried her out the bathroom door. I had 20 minutes left to pick Bella's outfit, dress her in it, and do her hair. I sifted through her new clothes and found a pink dress. I slipped it over her head, making sure that all of her hair was bundled up in a towel so it wouldn't touch her dress. Then I begun drying her hair and putting sparkly clips in it. She seemed to like that. Alice, they'll be here in 5 minutes. Edward called from downstairs. You don't need to tell me that. I yelled back, annoyed. I took Bella by the hand and led her out of the room. It was time to meet the agent. Edward's POV. The 5 minutes spent waiting for the representative of the adoption agency was pure agony. Even though my vision had predicted that Bella would be staying with us, there was still anxiety. Anything could happen that would change the outcome. Poor Jasper was desperately trying to calm everyone down. Bella became impatient after 2 minutes of waiting around and crawled across the couch to tug on my sleeve. Can I have choco milk? She whispered, probably not even realizing we could all hear her. We hadn't actually told her to what extent our abilities go. She didn't even know we had any special abilities. I shook my head. Not now, Bella. We're waiting for someone, remembers? She pouted her trembling lips at me, and I rolled my eyes, sighing. Really, Bella? What am I going to do with you? Gimme choco milk, she demanded, pounding her small fist on my arm. I reached around to grab her around her tiny waist and lifted her into the air. Bella squealed and wriggled around. I placed her on my lap and smiled. Please be good, Bella, I whispered, leaning down to kiss her hair. Just for a few minutes, okay? Once the lady gets here, I promise I'll get you the milk." Bella sighed, but nodded her head anyway. She leaned her head on my chest and grabbed my shirt in her fist, crumpling it. Alice began to protest she'd picked out everyone's outfits for today and didn't want them rumpled. I gave her a death glare and shook my head. Alice folded her arms across her chest and pouted. It didn't work for her as well as it did for Bella. Figures he'd given to Bella, she thought. I was about to ask her what it meant since she'd started reading Othello word for word in her head. But something stopped me, a car. We all, with the exception of Bella, heard the engine of the car pulling up in the driveway. All of us stood up. I handed Bella over to Rosalie, because Bella was squirming for her. Rose smiled and cradled Bella gently against her. The doorbell rang, and Carlisle walked over to open it. He smiled widely, and I heard a woman stuttering. Hi? I smirked, and Emmett snorted. Esme glared at us to keep quiet, but Emmett was still chortling to himself, so Rose reached over to smack him on the head. He quieted down immediately. "Hello," Carlisle said warmly. "Please come in." He stepped aside to let in a woman in a hideous purple suit and an even more hideous hat. I could hear the distaste in Alice's head and fought to keep a straight face. It really wouldn't help our case if I started laughing at her. Good God, it has feathers on it. Feathers. Is she blind or just challenged? I could hear the others attempting to distract themselves from laughing as well. It was especially hard for Jasper, who felt everyone's glee. Then, out of nowhere, came my angel's sweet voice. "You have a funny hat." Emmett had to excuse himself to the backyard. Jasper was gasping as if he was in pain. Rosalie hid her face behind Bella's back, though I could see her shoulders shaking, and Alice clapped a hand to her mouth. Esme and Carlisle were the only ones with a semblance of control. "Children," Esme chided. Emmett came back into the room, a big grin on his face. Carlisle shook his head.
"I'm sorry."
"My children can be a little juvenile?" The lady guessed in her mind. "Though look at them all beautiful, I wonder." I narrowed my eyes at her. 1 minute into our meeting, and I was already wishing she'd leave. "Anyway," Carlisle continued, oblivious to what the woman was really thinking. He stuck a hand out to shake hers. "I'm Carlisle Cullen," he smiled. The woman smiled back in what I supposed was intended to be coy manner. "Darla Noonan." Carlisle shook her hand briefly and let it go. He walked over to Esme and wrapped his arm around her waist, smiling at her fondly. "This is my wife, Esme," he introduced. Darla's eyes widened. "He's taken? Oh, damn." "My children, Edward, Emmett, Rosalie, Alice, and Jasper. That's a lot of children. I wondered if this would be a good idea to have Bella Swan continue living with them. And of course, we have our angel, Bella, here," Carlisle continued, smiling fondly at Bella. Bella giggled at being mentioned and waved shyly at Darla. "Well, she is adorable. You can't blame the Cullens for wanting to keep her." "Well, I'd have to spend the day here, observing Bella interact with the family," she said briskly. "I'd have to ask questions every now and then, too. If you don't mind," she added as an afterthought. Carlisle shook his head, but it was Esme who answered. "Oh, of course not. You're more than welcomed," she smiled sweetly. "No wonder he married her. She's practically an angel." I hid my smile as Carlisle motioned for us to continue with our day. Bella squirmed again to get down, and Rosalie allowed it. She ran over to me and tugged at my pant leg the highest she could reach. "Edward," she pouted. "You promised." I laughed and took her hand, walking with her slowly towards the kitchen. I was aware of Darla following us. I suppose she had to keep an eye on Bella at all times. I got Bella to wait for me by the kitchen while I poured chocolate milk into her mug. She had gotten addicted to it, really. Darla stepped right in front of Bella. Bella, being human, hadn't heard her and was startled. To Darla's surprise, she screamed and ran to hide behind me. Darla stuttered, alarmed. I leveled her with a glare. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't scare Bella, I told her as politely as I could. She had just gone through a very traumatic experience, as I'm sure you know. Darla regained her composure and nodded her head, straightening up. Of course. It was silly of me. I just haven't been properly introduced to Isabella. Bella, came the muffled response behind me. I placed the mug on the kitchen aisle and turned around to look at Bella. I squatted down to her level and looked her in the eyes. Are you all right? I asked. Bella nodded her head, peeking at Darla under her lashes. Is she mad at me? She asked in a whisper. I shook my head. Darla was surprised, but not mad. Of course, I could understand where Bella was coming from. Darla had a square jaw that always looked set, her eyes were cold, and she never smiled. She looked like a strict teacher more than anything. No, Bella, of course not. Who could get angry at you? I teased, hoping to lighten the mood. It worked. Bella started laughing. I picked her up in my arms and handed her the mug of chocolate milk, which she sipped at happily. Darla narrowed her eyes at Bella and I, probably wondering about our relationship. I'd better start asking her simple questions. Do you like it here, Isabella? She asked. Bella nodded her head, smiling. I played football, she announced proudly. That was completely random. Oh, really? Who did you play with? The boys, Bella replied. The girls didn't want to play because of the dirt. Alice wasn't very happy when I got dirt on my clothes. But it's okay because she only got mad at the boys. All right, on to the next question. And you like hanging out with? She glanced at me, already forgetting my name. Edward, I supplied correctly. Bella nodded again enthusiastically. He's my best friend, she informed a shocked Darla. She cleared her throat and begun again. And who do you like best? Edward. Bella scrunched her nose in concentration. Then she said, Mommy said it's not nice to differentiate people because we're all not the same. Darla raised an eyebrow, and I chuckled. She's incredibly mature for her age, I explained. Darla cracked the smallest smile at this. Evidently. Suddenly, Alice bounced into the kitchen, a wide grin on her face. Let's go watch a movie, Bella, she said. Bella smiled at me. Can we? She asked, batting her lashes at me. I nodded my head. If you wish. We headed back to the living room where, thank heavens, everyone was sitting. Jasper sensed my relief and chuckled quietly. I shot him a glare. I sat down on the couch and made to settle Bella next to me, but Darla went to sit on her other side. Bella was still shy when it came to Darla. I wasn't sure if it was specifically her or if she was shy around strangers in general. She seemed to get along fine with everyone when we first met her, though. So I settled her on my lap. What would you like to watch, Bella? Esme asked, smiling. Bella thought for a moment, then leaned in to whisper directly into my ear, cupping a hand around her mouth so that no one could see it. Of course, other than Darla, everyone else could hear. Could we watch Peter Pan? You said we could when we went out that other day. She reminded me. Yes, I had yet to fulfill that promise. Alice couldn't just pop in Peter Pan in the DVD without supposedly hearing Bella's answer, so I cleared my throat and said, she wants to watch Peter Pan. While Alice was retrieving the DVD from our massive collection, Darla turned to me and asked, is she always this close to you? I heard the disapproval in her voice and wondered, why on earth would she disapprove of Bella's attachment to me? I was the first person she saw when she woke up. After such a traumatic experience, it was only natural for her to latch onto me. Our relationship went beyond that, though. I really did enjoy spending time with Bella, and it seemed she enjoyed being around me, too. She really was my best friend. Was that so odd? I tuned in to Darla's thoughts. I've never seen anything like it. Normally, orphans aren't so outright about their new families.
They're shy.
But Bella seems to get along fine with them. That blonde girl was holding her just now, and Bella seemed to like her. And now this Edward and Alice. I'll have to make more observations. The way Bella acts around the Cullens, it's like she's known them her whole life instead of a few days. I smirked to myself. Leave it to Ice Queen over there to turn this into something horrible. I nodded my head and answered her spoken question.
Yes.
It's only been a few days, but our family feels like she's a part of it. Darla nodded her head slowly, as if she was processing a very hard piece of information. The movie started playing just when Darla started to ask another question. Bella shot her a disapproving look and said, "Sure. The movie's playing." I stifled a snort and focused on the screen, trying hard not to read Darla's mind or sneak a peek at how she reacted to Bella's chiding. Because it was one of her favorite stories, Bella got very excited throughout the movie. She actually screamed out the name Peter Pan when he first showed up on the screen. And when Tinkerbell made an appearance, Bella turned to Alice and said, "That's you, Alice. You're Tink." We all burst out laughing at this, even Alice. Apparently, she had seen this coming and wasn't all too surprised by it. She found it adorable nonetheless. By the time the movie ended, Bella was worn out. She had woken up earlier today thanks to Emmett, and she had played football and even watched a movie. She was ready to take a nap. I shifted her in my arms, while Alice turned off the TV so as not to wake Bella up. "I'm going to go put her in bed," I announced, just for Darla's sake. Darla nodded her head. Alice, Rose, and Esme all came forward before I could stand up and kissed Bella on the forehead. Bella shifted slightly, but didn't wake up. In fact, she started snoring. I smiled and stood up, heading for the stairs. When we reached her room, I gently laid her on the bed after peeling off the comforter. Once she was safely and comfortably tucked in, I kissed her lightly on the forehead and turned to go. "Edward." I turned to face her, frowning. Had she woken up already? I'd really like it if she could nap for a few hours. It had been a tiring morning for her. Emmett deliberately came at her during our football game because she screamed bloody murder every time. But she was still asleep. I smiled knowingly.
Ah.
She had started sleep-talking again. And once more, her dreams were of me. I liked having a 6-year-old human best friend. Kitty.
Kitty? Oh no.
Her dreams of having a kitten. Maybe I really should talk to Esme and Rosalie about this. It would keep her company once we move out of Forks. I'd have to go to school during the day, together with Alice, Jasper, Emmett, and Rosalie. Carlisle would have to go to work. The only one around to play with her was Esme, and even she wouldn't be able to drop everything to play with Bella all the time. A kitten sounded like perfect company for her, if that was what she wanted. I'd have to talk with Esme for sure about this. I went out of the door, keeping it ajar a fraction of an inch so it wasn't immersed in darkness, and made my way down the stairs. "Is she sleeping?" Esme asked, knowing fully well that Bella was. I nodded my hand, taking my place on the couch yet again. Darla took a deep breath. "It's time to interrogate the adoptive family then." I rolled my eyes. She made it sound as if we were bad people, and she wanted to break us down so she could find the truth. Well, I couldn't exactly blame her. Some adoptive parents could be not what they seemed to be, but the idea of us hurting Bella was simply ridiculous. "I just wanted to make sure that you can handle this, Mr. and Mrs. Cullen," Darla began. "You already have 5 children. Bella is a child. She's going to need a lot of attention." Esme nodded her head and wrapped her hand around Carlisle's. "Yes, we're well aware of that. But see, my children are all grown up. Rose, Emmett, and Jasper here are going to be juniors in high school. Edward and Alice are sophomores. Bella would have my undivided attention because I stay at home," she explained. Darla nodded her head. I can see that she has a very strong bond with your son, Edward. She nodded in my direction.
Ha.
Wait till she's older, Ladia. Burning up for you, baby. I shot Emmett a look, but I couldn't comment on his thoughts because of Darla. Wait until Bella was older? What did that mean? I would assume it meant that our friendship would steadily grow stronger throughout the years. But why would Emmett start singing that Belle song out of nowhere? It just added to my suspicion that they were hiding something from me. I sighed. After a century, they still had to hide things from me. Didn't they know that in the end, I'd just end up knowing it all? I was a mind reader after all. Their attempts would be for nothing. How is she like with the rest of you? I haven't had a proper chance yet. I know she enjoys your company, but I would prefer to know how each of you perceive your relationship with. Bella is, Darla said, pulling me out of my thoughts. This is where my degree in psychology comes in, Darla was thinking. Well, I love her like a sister, Alice spoke up. I'd love to take her shopping, she added as an afterthought. I rolled my eyes. Somehow, I don't think Bella would be too excited about that. Jasper shrugged. We read together. Darla's eyebrows drew together. Read together, she repeated slowly. Jasper smirked at the memory of Bella reading.
Yeah.
Bella's just starting to learn how to read, so she's not very good. She came into the library, saw me reading, and started to read to me. I've been helping her with that, he explained. Darla nodded her head and shifted her gaze to Emmett. My God, he's huge. And you? She asked politely. Emmett clapped his hands together and smiled. She's adorable, the tyke. I tease her a lot, but she knows I'm joking. We played football this morning. Yes, she mentioned that, Darla murmured, almost to herself. Rosalie smiled, though in her mind, she wasn't all that fond of Darla. I love her. I think my reactions to her are more maternal, like Esme. I really do think Bella would have a great time living with us. She's already a part of the family in our minds, she said through gritted teeth. She wanted more than anything to have Bella stay with us. I guessed, in her mind, she'd pitted Darla as an enemy or a challenge. Esme and Carlisle exchanged a look, smiling at each other, before turning back to face Darla. Their hands were still interlocked. Well, we're the parents, so we feel very blessed to have Bella around. These past few days have been very interesting, to say the least. Bella's been a miracle to us, I suppose. Darla stared at her, uncomprehending. I can't have children, Esme said sadly. We adopted all of ours. I knew that. They sent me the file yesterday. Carlisle and Esme Cullen adopted 5 children. Rosalie and Jasper Hale twins. Edward and Alice, siblings. And Emmett. Well, their record has been amazing so far. Judging by their affections for Bella and her reaction to them, I'd say this is the perfect family for her. I'll just stay for a few more hours, see her when she wakes up, talk to her a little, see her interact with the others. I smiled slightly at the others to show them that we were going to be all right. Alice was right once again. Bella was staying. I have never been so happy in my life. Bella's POV. I started awake when I heard a knock. I blinked and looked around my room. Where had the noise come from? Why was I in my room? The last I remembered, Peter was saying goodbye to Wendy. I really wished she would have stayed in Neverland. It's what I would have done. Stay with your best friend and never grow up. What could be better than that? Bella, can we come in? I heard Esme's voice. I smiled, sitting up in bed. I missed Esme. I hadn't played with her today. "Kay," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes sleepily. Esme pushed open the door, and the entire Cullen family poured in. I saw Darla at the door, watching us. Rosalie climbed in next to me on the bed and sat next to me. She wrapped an arm around my waist, and I leaned into her, smiling. I reached up to tug on her blonde locks. It never ceased to amaze me how pretty Rose looked. Did you get enough sleep, Angel? Emmett asked. I nodded my head, then thought, can I have chicken fingers? I asked Esme sweetly. I'm a little hungry. Chicken fingers were one of the things Rosalie said I could eat. She was obsessed with wanting me to eat healthy. I really hoped she wouldn't force me to eat vegetables, though. I hated lettuce, and tomatoes, and broccoli. All right, I'll make it for you in a little while, Esme replied gently. But first, can you talk to Darla for a bit? She's been waiting for you to wake up. I looked towards the door, where Darla was waiting. I gestured for her to come in. Do you want to see my room? I asked her. I really loved my room. Esme and Alice had decorated it.
It was blue the whole way.
It was one of my favorite colors, and I knew Edward liked it. Darla stepped in hesitantly and smiled at me. Do you like it? I asked. Esme and Alice made it. Darla nodded her head as she looked around. It's a very nice room, Bella, she said, sounding almost surprised. Well, it wasn't just nice, it was great. I climbed out of bed and ran over to Darla. I grabbed her hand and tugged her to the bookshelves Esme had built for me. Look, Esme made it, and Jasper got me the books. I showed it to her. I grabbed the Cat in the Hat and shoved it in her hands. I was trying to read that, but Jasper laughed because I messed it all up, so I stopped. But I read another book, so it's okay, I assured her before she got upset. Darla smiled at me. That's nice too, Bella. I frowned. Why was everything nice to her? And why was she smiling when she didn't mean it? I didn't like it when people do that. They weren't being very honest. Esme told me you had to be honest. She told me. Bella, Carlisle called. I turned to look at him. Darla wanted to talk to you, remembers? I nodded my head, blushing. Come sit here. He pointed at the small armchair Alice had gotten for me. It was in the middle of the room, where all my toys were. I padded over to the rug and sat in the armchair. I imagined Emmett sitting in this chair, meant for me, and crushing it under his weight. I clapped a hand over my mouth to keep from laughing. Darla came to sit on the floor in front of me and smiled again. So, Bella, I talked to your family. They love you very much, she said. My eyes lit up, and I was pretty sure my cheeks were red. My family? I asked. Darla nodded. I get to stay? I shrieked, jumping up to hug Esme around the legs. They all laughed at this, and Esme bent to swing me up in her arms. She planted kisses all over my face, which tickled because her lips were so cold. I wrapped my arms around her neck in a chokehold nonetheless, and smiled at Edward behind Esme's shoulder. Bella? Darla asked from behind me. I turned a little to look at her and flashed her a wide smile. Are you happy that you get to stay? I nodded my head emphatically.
Yes.
It's Neverland, I giggled. I knew Darla wouldn't understand because she didn't know, but the others did, and they broke out into laughter. I was happy that I get to stay with them. They were my family now. I get to play with Jasper, Emmett, and Edward. I get to play with Rose and Alice. I get to read bedtime stories with Esme, and I get to follow Carlisle around the house. And best of all, I get to be with my best friend, Edward. 10. Happy Birthday, Bella Part 1. Esme's POV. It has been 3 weeks since Darla Noonan had stepped out of her house, and 3 weeks since the official papers had been signed. Bella Swan was now Isabella Marie Hale. We had gotten around to telling Carlisle about Alice's vision when Edward went hunting, a task he found incredibly hard to do now since Bella was in our lives. He hated leaving her alone for a second, even though she would be surrounded by the rest of us. But his eyes had turned a deadly black color, so he had no other choice. We had all decided that Bella should take Rosalie's and Jasper's last names. If she became Bella Cullen, it would mean that she and Edward were more or less siblings. That would make the future too ridiculous. Edward had wondered why we had named her Hale, instead of Cullen. He wanted Bella as close to him as possible. None of us had answered his question, which of course made him even more suspicious. Keeping this secret from my son had been nothing but tedious. Emmett had almost blurted it out 5 times in these past weeks. If it hadn't been for Rose's spontaneous urges, I don't think we would have managed. Jasper always sent Emmett's thoughts in a different direction each time he thought of spilling the beans. Be it a shot of lust, or a shot of self-pity, or a shot of anger, Emmett would find himself completely distracted. But I know Edward won't stop until he finds out. I sighed, then glanced at the cooking book to my left. Tomorrow was Bella's birthday. The house had never been so busy. After Bella had gone to sleep, Alice had taken out the decorations she'd hidden and started working on it. The living room looked as if Santa had crashed his sleigh in it. Edward had told everyone that Bella hated shopping or having money spent on her too much, so he wanted us to buy her a present each. But even he went overboard. I bought her 3 myself. Oh, can you blame us? It's our Bella's first birthday with us Cullens and Hales.
It was a very special occasion.
I was baking Bella's cake and making one of her favorite dishes, macaroni and cheese. Honestly, the gooey substance disgusts me to no end. How could anyone eat that? But she seemed incredibly fond of it, so I was making it for tomorrow's party. We were going to surprise Bella with a whole day of birthday fun. We were already going to move next week, and I knew Bella was upset about that. Not only did her parents live here, she had grown attached to the house. It was hard enough for us when we've moved for so many times. Imagine how much harder it was for Bella. Edward, Jasper, and Emmett had gone around the house collecting the presents they had hidden all over for the past 2 weeks. I honestly don't want to know where they managed to hide 30-something presents. I looked at the clock. I had 2 hours left before Bella wakes up. I really needed to hurry. I hoped Bella would love her presents, the cake and the mac and cheese. I wanted this to be a very special day for her. This was, after all, the first year she would be Bella Hale. Emmett wanted to be the one to wake Bella up again, but Rosalie said she didn't want to scare the girl the first thing on her birthday. So I took one of the small brownies I made and placed 1 lit candle on it. We were all going to wake her up as a family. Alice opened the door as quietly as she could. She was practically bouncing off the walls in excitement. Poor Jasper. We crowded around the bed, and Edward reached to tickle Bella awake. It worked less than 10 seconds later. She was laughing so hard her eyes popped open. Her eyes widened at the sight of all of us in her room. "Happy birthday, Bella," we cried out. Her lips formed a goofy grin as she wriggled to a sitting position. "I get a brownie?" she asked, looking at the brownie in my hand hungrily. "Before breakfast?" She shot a look at Rosalie. It was true that Rose had taken the role of the strict mother. She doted on Bella, but her overprotective nature often overrode everything else. Lately, she had been obsessed with Bella eating healthy. I laughed. "Yes, Bella. It's your special day today. Make a wish and blow out the candle," I said, holding the brownie out in front of her. Bella's eyes lit up, and she thought for a second. When she decided what to wish on, she squeezed her eyes shut and blew out the candle. When she opened them, I had already taken out the little candlestick. She took the brownie and chewed on it hungrily.
We laughed at that.
"Come on, Bella, up and at them." Alice squealed, lifting Bella off the bed and rushing her to the bathroom. "We have to hurry."
"Why?"
I heard Bella's innocent reply. I grinned. Well, won't Bella be pleasantly surprised today? I stood up from my position on the edge of Bella's bed and looked at everyone. "I'm the mother," I said sternly. "So I get to give her my present first." I didn't know if they would listen. I was just really excited to give Bella my special present. The rest of the things I got for her could wait until we sat down for cake. The others nodded glumly. They had wanted to give Bella their special present first, too. Well, that's too bad. I was their mother, and as for Carlisle, he wouldn't deny me anything. Edward smirked at that, and I smacked him on the shoulder. I walked out of the room, hearing Bella's squeals as Alice played with her in the bathroom. I went to my bedroom and sat at my vanity. I opened my jewelry box and picked out a silver heart-shaped locket with diamonds surrounding it. My mother gave me this locket right before I got married. It was one of my favorite memories of her, and this locket was one of my favorite mementos. I would love to give this to my new daughter. I tucked it in safely in my dress pocket and walked out the door. I needed to take out the cake from the oven and start making the mac and cheese. It was relatively easy to make, so Bella won't have to wait long. I ran into Edward in the kitchen, and he smiled at me. He walked over to me and wrapped his arms around me. "It's an amazing present, Mom," he said truthfully. "Bella would love it." I smiled at him and placed a hand on his cheek. "Thank you." Before long, Bella was ready. I had just placed the mac and cheese in the oven, so I went out into the living room to see her reaction to Alice's decorations. I knew it was too much, but Bella's reaction was what Alice cared about. Bella was wearing a blue dress. It made her look like a princess, really. Alice even placed a tiara in her hair, which had been curled. She blinked at the sight in front of her, and we all waited for her reaction. Slowly, she opened her mouth and said, "That is really, really, really pink." Alice, being Alice, took this as a compliment. I went forward and took Bella by the hand. "Bella, can you come with me for a moment into the garden? I'd like to show you something," I asked her. Bella nodded at me, smiling in that sweet way of hers. In a way, she really was my first child. Not forgetting my baby, of course. Edward, Alice, Jasper, Emmett, and Rosalie had been amazing children. My life felt so complete with each addition Carlisle made into our family. But Bella was human. She was warm and soft and lovely. She was a little child who needed me, depended on me. I loved her. When we reached the garden, I sat Bella down on the swing set Emmett had set up for her a few weeks back. "I want to give you something very special," I told her, kneeling down to her eye level. "I want you to promise that you'll always keep it safe with you, okay?" Bella nodded again. "Okay," she said softly. "I promise." I smiled and reached into my pocket to take out the silver locket. "My own mother gave this to me when I was let's just say a long time ago," I chuckled. "She gave it to me right before I got married. Now, I want you to have it." Bella's eyes widened when she saw the locket. "It's pretty," she murmured, reaching out with a tentative finger to touch it. I nodded my head, leaning forward to fasten the locket around her neck. When that was done, I adjusted so that her hair wasn't trapped beneath the chain. "It looks really good on you, Bella," I smiled. Bella launched herself at me and hugged me tightly. I closed my eyes, burying my nose in her hair and inhaling her sweet freesia scent.
"Thank you," she said.
"I love you very much, Mommy." My eyes snapped open and I pulled back to stare at her. "What?" I whispered. Bella looked down at her feet shyly. I realized that my reaction might have scared her into thinking that I was angry at her for calling me Mommy. Silly Bella. She had made me the happiest woman on earth. I hugged her again. "I love you, too, Angel," I whispered. I felt like I could sob happy tears at this moment. I was a mother. Bella was my child. What could be better? Edward's POV. "I love you very much, Mommy." My head snapped up, and my eyes found the back door leading to the garden. Through the huge glass windows, I could see Bella and Esme hugging. "Mommy." She'd called Esme Mommy. What am I, then? First this, then Edward, she's supposed to be mine. I turned to look at Rosalie. Jasper had been made aware of the emotions running through her as well, and he was trying to calm her down. "What do you mean, Rosalie?" I asked quietly. She started, as if she had forgotten I was even in the room. Her mind was immediately filled with shopping catalogs and things from Victoria's Secret that I never wanted to acknowledge even existed. "Nothing, Edward," she said bitterly. I raised an eyebrow, and she sighed. "Nothing, okay?" I was just saying, "You're her best friend. That's all. Will you please just drop it?" I nodded my head and turned away. Rosalie was upset because Bella had called Esme mommy. But surely she knew that Bella loved Esme and Rosalie the same way? That she treated the both of them as mothers? "She loves you like a mother, too, Rose," I said without looking at her. For a moment, she was silent verbally and mentally. "Then thanks." I smiled to myself. My smile only widened when Bella entered the room. I called dibs. I yelled before anyone could say it was their turn. They glared at me, but I shrugged and stepped forward. Bella looked up at me expectantly and smiled. So she knew I wanted something. "Would you come with me to the meadow?" I asked. Bella smiled wider and nodded, raising her arms above her head to indicate that she wanted me to carry her. I did so willingly and tucked her head under my chin, asking her to close her eyes. Within moments, I was running out the door to get to the meadow. We reached in minutes due to my speed. I placed her on her feet, and she smiled contentedly as she glanced around the familiar place. We'd been here twice, sometimes 3 times a week, since that first day we'd been here. Bella had loved it here and asked me to take her here often. It was one of the things that made her sad about moving we couldn't come here anymore. I knelt on both knees so that I wouldn't have to bend down and took out a silver bracelet with a diamond heart on it. The diamond heart was my mother's, I told her. It would mean a lot to me if you would accept this. I slipped the bracelet on her small wrist. It was a charm bracelet, really, and I was hoping to get her a new charm for every birthday or special occasion. I think it was fitting. Bella raised her left arm to stare at the charm. She smiled widely at me. "I love it a lot," she said, nodding her head in approval. "Thank you, Edward." I gently drew her small, fragile body to me and hugged her as tightly as I could without physically harming her. She was an amazing person, and she was only 7 years old. I couldn't even begin to imagine how amazing she would be as a grown woman. I frowned as I remembered Alice's vision. Bella looked beautiful as a woman, but she was also obviously being coy in front of a boy. I couldn't see the other person, but I wouldn't allow her to date. I would talk Carlisle and Esme out of giving her permission to go. That age, what was it, 15, 16, was too young for her to start being alone with boys. I knew human boys. I've read their thoughts for years. They were vile and uncouth. No way was my Bella going to be around them. I felt Bella playing with the collar of my shirt and smiled. I still had years left before I had to worry about that. "Ready to go home, Bella?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "No," she sighed. It was the same answer she'd given me every time I asked when we came here. But today was different. It was her birthday. Others were waiting for her, too.
"Come on."
"The others still have presents for you left, you know?" At this, she perked up and jumped into my arms. "Let's go home," she screamed. I laughed, making sure she closed her eyes before taking off. She might know our secret, but there was no need to scare her with my speed. Jasper's POV. I paced the living room, waiting anxiously for Edward and Bella to return. Alice had informed me that they would come back in 2 minutes, but it felt longer to me. I really wanted to give Bella my present, but I didn't know if she would like it. Esme and Edward had given her jewelry, something Alice said was a girl's best friend, no matter how young said girl was. What I was giving her was a book. It had the same sentimental value as Esme's locket and Edward's charm bracelet, but it was still a book. Alice had said that she'd seen Bella's reaction, and I had nothing to worry about. I was still a nervous wreck. What good was it to be an empath and not be able to calm yourself down? True to Alice's words, Edward walked into the room with Bella wrapped around his neck. Even with closed eyes, I could see her smiling widely. "Hey, Bella?" I asked. Bella opened her eyes and scanned the room until her eyes met mine. She smiled bigger and hopped down from Edward's arms. "Do you mind coming to the library with me for a little bit?" Bella shook her head and took my hand in hers. Her small hand was so warm, yet it wasn't even half the size of mine. I could just imagine how small it must feel to Emmett. When we were in the library, I sat her down in her usual chair she sat in whenever she read to me. "I wanted to give you a special present. My dad made me a book when I was little," I told her. Her chocolate eyes widened. "He made you a book?" she asked, amazed. I laughed and nodded my head. "He sewed on the leather and everything. Anyway, my dad knew that I loved a good story, so he made one up. See?" I took the leather-bound book on the table. It was already yellowed, but it was a good memory nonetheless. The story is about a little boy who wanted to see the world, but his parents said that he was too young. So he ran away to find adventure, I explained, flipping through the pages so Bella could see the words and drawings. She gasped at this. "He ran away," she whispered. I nodded my head. "But it's okay because the story gets a happy ending. The boy saw what he wanted to see and realized that he belonged at home." Bella nodded her head, satisfied, and settled back in her seat. I closed the book and placed it on her lap. Taking her hand in mine again, I looked her straight in the eyes. "My dad gave this to me to remind me that I could do anything I wanted to do. I just had to believe I could. I want you to do the same." For a moment, Bella didn't say anything. She kept quiet, and her gaze fell on the book on her lap. She bit her lip as she did so. I thought I had blown it, that she hated my gift. Well, who would give a book to a 7-year-old? I'd been stupid to think it was a good gift. Bella fingered the brown leather cover of the book and smiled up at me. "I really love it, Jazz," she whispered. "I think it's a great story." "Thank you." I smiled and leaned forward to kiss her forehead. "Good," I said, relieved. I guess I didn't have anything to worry about after all. "Let's go back downstairs." "I think Esme's mac and cheese is all done," I told her. She immediately jumped off the armchair, book clutched to her chest, and ran to the door. She started to stumble and fall, but I was there in the blink of an eye to catch her. "Silly Bella," I chuckled, and carried her down. Bella's POV. Alice had decorated the entire living room in pink. I couldn't even see the couch anymore. But Edward helped me, so I was okay. Esme made me mac and cheese, which only I ate. When I asked, Edward told me that vampires don't need to eat normal food because they hunt. I asked him if he meant because they drink blood, and he told me to just eat my food. Edward, Esme, and Jasper had all given me their gifts, so I was expecting one from Rosalie, Emmett, Alice, and Carlisle. So when I saw the pile of presents in the living room right next to the couch, I was very surprised. I wanted to rip out the wrappings and see what they all were right then and there, but Rosalie made me eat first. She said that I hadn't even eaten breakfast yet, and I would faint if I got too hungry. I knew I didn't like being the center of attention, but this was okay. I liked being surrounded by the Cullens. And even though it was embarrassing to have the spotlight on me, I didn't mind it today. I just felt so happy. I was surprised when Esme, Edward, and Jasper gave me such special presents. Their own mommies and daddies had given them these presents. I didn't really want to accept them because I didn't want them to be sad if I took them. But Alice had told me upstairs to just accept whatever someone gave me today. It was their way of saying they loved me, so it wasn't polite to say no. As it turned out, I loved their presents for me. Once I was done with the mac and cheese, Alice insisted that we open one present, but she got to choose. She grabbed a square-shaped gift wrapped in pink wrapping. I tore it off greedily to find a box. I opened it and took out a camera. Alice wanted me to open the gift so that we could take pictures starting from today, my birthday. Carlisle brought out a big cake for me. Esme had made it herself. On the chocolate cake, Esme had "Happy Birthday, Bella" written in icing and had stuck 7 little candles on it. Alice snapped shot after shot of everyone singing the happy birthday song, of me blushing, of me blowing out the candle, and of me cutting the cake with Rosalie's help. Finally, I could eat the cake. Even then, Alice kept snapping pictures. Edward finally had to take it away from her so she could calm down. "Bella, I have a surprise for you," Edward said, grinning cunningly. I raised an eyebrow at him and bit my bottom lip. The last time he had smiled like that, he had smeared mud all over my new outfit, which had angered Alice to no end, of course, and we had gotten into a mud fight. Emmett and Jasper had helped. Esme had gotten so angry, she'd grounded them all for a week. But she didn't blame me because she said that Edward had provoked me and made me have a mud fight. Thank God I didn't get punished. "Wait here," he told me before I could ask anything. I looked around me, but no one would tell me anything. They just smiled like they had a secret. Esme took my plate and placed it on the coffee table. I heard a soft meow, and my head snapped up. Edward was approaching me with the cutest little orange kitty in the world. I gasped and started to climb off the couch, but Jasper placed a hand on my shoulder. "Wait, Bella," he laughed. I bounced in my seat. Was that the fastest Edward could walk? He was a vampire. Finally, he reached me and sat down next to me. He placed the little kitty on my lap, and I smiled down at it. "This is Lily," he told me. "She's 2 months old." "She's tiny," I commented. "Why don't you touch her?" Edward suggested. I hesitated and looked up at him. I was afraid I'd hurt Lily. She was 2 months old. She was a baby. Edward took my hand gently and ran my fingers through Lily's fur. Lily didn't seem hurt by this. She patted softly on my lap and nuzzled her nose into my tummy. It tickled. I laughed and stroked Lily's fur even more. "Well, I guess it's safe to say, what's her favorite present?" Emmett joked. I looked up to see all of them staring at me and Lily. I blushed and turned to Edward. "How did you know I wanted a kitty?" I asked him, pouting. "You talk in your sleep," he chuckled. I think I blushed even more. "No," I gasped. Edward leaned forward to kiss my forehead. His lips felt especially cold to my overheated skin. "Don't worry, Bella. Nothing embarrassing," he assured me. I began to relax and looked down at the baby cat in my lap again. She was so precious.
"Yet,"
Emmett called out. I groaned. I needed a lock for my door. Thank you for joining us for part 1, covering chapters 1 to 10 of Bella Hale by JulesSC.
Did you know?
One little-known fact about the Twilight universe is that Stephenie Meyer originally envisioned the series as a standalone novel, but its immense popularity turned it into a phenomenon. Fanfiction like Bella Hale shows just how much this world continues to inspire creativity. Your engagement means the world to us. If you enjoyed this journey, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Grimoire Audiobooks to keep the magic alive. As Bella Hale reminds us, sometimes the family we choose, or discover, can change everything. Until next time, thank you for being part of the Grimoire Audiobooks family. Stay enchanted, and see you in part 2.